Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again.
You're streaming with the Fantasy Follow. What's up, everybody? Welcome to a special edition tonight of TFF Live. This is a playoff special as we get on our way to our Fantasy League Championships. Hope you guys are all making a great run and got some great games ahead of you still. It's a Tuesday night. We've got a lot of content for you. We got some waiver wire names to go through. And, of course, as always, we are taking your fantasy football questions in our chat all show long. Even if we're doing other content, please feel free to drop us a chat, and we will get to you as soon as we can. I do see a couple of chats there already. Before we get to them tonight, we're going to start out with some headlines here as we go into Week 15 for your fantasy football playoffs. And, unfortunately, the headline we start out with is a headline we've been talking about a lot so far this year. It's Christian McCaffrey for the Carolina Panthers. Once again, not looking good to play this week. Just so unfortunate that a top player in fantasy football and a top draft pick has had such a struggle this year so far. Shoulder and quad injuries again. This would be 10 of the last 11 games were he not to play. He is doubtful right now. And today we heard from Matt Rule talking about his prospects, whether or not he will play this week.
I'm not expecting him to play as of right now. We'll see how the next couple of days unfold. Obviously, today was a walkthrough, so he was able to do some things, but I'm not expecting him to play as we sit here right now.
So, yeah, just another tough one, especially if you've been waiting all year long to hopefully get McCaffrey back for your playoffs. Just really unfortunate that he has had such injury problems. He's seemed to have so little trouble with injuries up until this season, and it's been nothing but so far this year. So, again, Christian McCaffrey doubtful. Perhaps this is a bonus for you if you have Mike Davis. If you're not somebody who has Christian McCaffrey in your lineup or on your roster, if you do have Davis as a handcuff to McCaffrey, certainly a great matchup for the Panthers and Davis for the run game against Green Bay this week. So we look for Mike Davis, who had a great game this past weekend, to potentially have another great game this weekend. All right, another guy in the headlines kind of out of nowhere here is Ronald Jones for the Tampa Bay Bucks. He is undergoing surgery to repair a broken finger. This is the same surgery that Chris Godwin went through. So it's not known yet for sure whether or not he misses this game, but we did see Godwin miss one game with the same procedure. So you probably expect Jones to potentially miss this week. And perhaps that means if you have Leonard Fournette sitting on your bench, might be a little bonus week for you in your fantasy playoffs. All right, Devonta Parker, some injury troubles for the Miami wide receiver, left the game on Sunday against New England. He has a slight hamstring strain. Not sure if he returns this week or not, but not looking great so far. So this is a player to keep an eye on. A lot of players to keep an eye on at this point in the week. A couple of guys here for the Chargers. Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler, both limited in practice. They do have a Thursday night game this week. They are both expected to play at the Raiders, but obviously two players that you need to keep an eye on as we start the beginning of this week here. Also, James Conner, currently nursing a quad injury. Perhaps this might explain, if this has been going on for a while, kind of the fact that Pittsburgh has not been seeming to want to try to run the ball too much. Haven't heard anything substantial in terms of reports yet on his outlook for this is a Monday night game at Cincinnati. So potentially some problems if you're wanting to play James Conner. Again, always tough with Monday night games in terms of making those plans. Raheem Mostert for the San Francisco 49ers has been battling injuries. He actually went in for an MRI yesterday, trying to evaluate that ankle injury. It's never good when a player goes for an MRI. It certainly doesn't bode well, but we haven't heard yet for sure if he plays or not. If he doesn't, again, that backfield in San Francisco, there's plenty of other options there. For Detroit, two guys we're looking at, Kenny Galladay and Matthew Stafford. Perhaps with Kenny Galladay, you might have already given up at this point. Has not played since week 8. I think it's very possible that they just end up shutting him down. But the guy who has been playing there is Matthew Stafford, who took an injury this past week to his ribs. Was seemed to be in a lot of pain. We heard yesterday from interim head coach Darrell Bevell talking about Stafford's ability to play through it this coming Sunday.
Yeah, I think it's, it's the rotational part. They're going to have to determine how he's going to be able to feel during the week, and I think it's different depending on which side it is on, to be honest with you. On your left side, you use that a little bit more than your right side. So, as I said, we'll just have to kind of monitor it and see how he's feeling and see how much he can push through it or not.
Interesting to see what happens there for Stafford. And then one more player in the headlines we're taking a look at, and it's Brandon Cooks for the Houston Texans, who missed the Week 14 game. Looks like he should be returning for Week 15, and that is a game at Indianapolis. Looking good so far. So those are some players in your headlines to keep an eye on as we get into our Week 15, as you get deep into your Fantasy Football League playoffs. All right, we're going to get right to the chats here, as we like to do. We'll get to that first. Like I said, we have plenty of other content to go through with you guys tonight. But this is what we love to do, is to talk fantasy football with you guys. So we'll get right to it. And we hear from Ilias Giftopoulos. Welcome back, Ilias. Well, you say hello, and glad to have you back on the stream tonight for our special Tuesday night show. And you say Montgomery or Aaron Jones. All right, let's get right into this. We love making these decisions. We hope we can do our best for you. Obviously, it's fantasy football, so I definitely always like to back up any opinions I have with as much information as I can give you to help you make those decisions as you move forward. I'm calling up on my other screen here, getting us ready. We're going to talk about the quarterback spot, and as always, I have stats for you on the left side of your screen. These are fantasy points allowed by your opponent. So, David Montgomery, we're talking about for Chicago. This is a 1 p.m. Sunday game at Minnesota. Montgomery obviously has been great as of late. Minnesota Vikings on our left side of our screen, allowing the 20th. They are 20th on the list. So that's actually the 13th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. Not quite as good a matchup as we've seen for him in the past few weeks. And then on the other side of that, you've got Aaron Jones. And let's see, they are a Saturday night game. A lot of different days for these games. 8:15 Saturday night game at home against Carolina. And where do we find Carolina on our list? Eighth most fantasy points to the running back position. I have to say, one of the things I talk about a lot of times with these decisions is 4 factors in deciding between players you want to play. It's talent, it's volume, it's matchup, and it's game script. When I talk about talent, I basically what I'm meaning is the higher tier player, the more you trust them even to potentially overcome a bad matchup. In this case, you have to think that Aaron Jones is the higher tier player of these two. And when you put that together with the fact that his matchup is better, playing Carolina, who is 8th in terms of fantasy points to the running back. Montgomery, although he's been great as of late, the matchup not quite as good. I know that Aaron Jones has not had quite the huge games of late that you might expect from him. So I'm going to look up his points really quick. I don't know that that's enough. The fact that he hasn't had as great of a couple of weeks, I don't know if that's enough to sit him in favor of David Montgomery in this matchup. I think in this particular situation, Jones is one of your main guys. You drafted him high. I saw a quote on Twitter from somebody recently this week about playing your studs. The guys that got you to the playoffs are the guys that are going to get you to Week 16. I like that quote a lot. Looking at a half-point PPR screen, we've seen a couple of games kind of still in the middle. Not awful, but Jones in Week 14 this past week against Detroit, 8.5 fantasy points. That's in a half point again, 69 yards. But the week before that against Philly, 130 yards and a touchdown, 22.3 again in a half point screen. I have to think that you got to rely on your main guy here, and that's Jones. Potentially, if there's a way to work Montgomery into that lineup. If perhaps there's a flex spot that you might feel better about him than another wide receiver, I could see that being a possibility. I do see a follow-up here. Let me pop that up here. Actually, I forgot to include Jonathan Taylor. So Montgomery, Taylor, or Aaron Jones. All right, well, that throws a little bit more into the mix. Let's take a look at the matchup for Taylor. They're playing Houston. So we know that Houston has been bleeding points to the running back spot. That is a 1 p.m. Sunday game. Houston, the second most fantasy points to running backs. So, yeah, I think of these three, just based on what we're looking at in terms of, the matchups and also how we feel about these players, you have to think that if you're picking one of these, if I had to order them, let's do it that way. If I had to order them, I'd put Jones first, I'd put Taylor second, and I would put Montgomery third. Taylor, to me, it's a close second. But the difference here is that even though you've got Jamal Williams in the backfield for Green Bay, more than likely you expect Aaron Jones to get the bulk of the work there. Even though Taylor's been great, there's always the threat of Nyheim Hines popping in with a big game and also Jordan Wilkins there in the backfield. So there are less mouths to feed, so to speak, in the backfield for Green Bay. And also Aaron Jones is one of your top guys. So, if you've gotten this far and you're making that run toward your championship, I don't think you're wrong to lean on that top guy. But again, that Taylor matchup is phenomenal. Perhaps there's a way you can work him into a flex spot depending on who your wide receivers are. Hit me back in the chat, Elias, and let me know your thoughts about that in terms of what your wide receivers look like going forward for this week, and maybe we can revisit this a lot. Again, I try to put up information so that you can help get a little bit to back up my opinion, because, again, fantasy football, it's all about opinions, but I want you guys to be able to make the best decisions possible. And as I always say, whichever guys you choose there, I hope that they definitely crush it. But I think Aaron Jones, he's a stud. Fine start this week. All right, let me get the graphic off the left side of the screen. Ilias, thank you again for being with us again, one of our regulars. Appreciate you being on the stream. Glad to see you here on another late night show here on Tuesday night as we look towards your either first or second round of your playoff matchups. Daniel Padilla is back with us tonight. Welcome back, Daniel. Glad to see you, another one of our regulars. You say tragic for CMC. Yes, tough for their team. And, tough, obviously, the injury for McCaffrey, it's this is just fantasy football, but at the same time, if you drafted him high and you're hoping to get him back, then it is a tough spot. We all wish that he was playing. For me personally, I know, like in my situation, I have picked up Mike Davis in a couple of spots, and I've tried to drop him a couple of times, and yet here he comes coming on back, and he had another great game last week. So perhaps you're in that situation where you have a Mike Davis to play, or somebody else has picked him up along the way. You follow up with, thank you for the insight last week. No, absolutely. Thank you for being here. I hope it worked out well. You say I started Hilton and Swift on your recommendation. I won my playoff game on a slim margin. Also, awesome. T.Y. Hilton had that great game last week. I know that he was a guy that we had talked about on a couple of our streams leading up to those games. So I was curious as to who went ahead and took a chance on starting him, because obviously he had some down games this year. So maybe a little bit tougher start in some situations, but you made that choice, you went for it, and it paid off well. And to be honest, I know Swift had a decent game, but I can't say that I actually looked up to see what his points were this past week. Swift isn't a guy that's on any of my rosters, so some of the guys that are on my rosters obviously stand out a little bit more. But I'm going to look that up right now because I do want to see what he did do for you. I know I did see he got in the end zone. 7 carries, 24 yards, got the 1 touchdown to save the day. That was 13 points on the PPR screen here. Don't know. Let's see if he had any. Yeah, he had some catches, 4 of 5 targets for 26 yards. So if you were playing full PPR, he'd add another 2 to that, so 15. So, yeah, every point counts in these matchups. And absolutely glad that you got that win. I'm going to just to as long as I'm talking about every point counts, I got to throw this in there really quick, because this is my own personal story from this past week, is that I had a win to get in matchup in one of my leagues, and I actually did win the matchup, but there were other teams that were with the same kind of a bunch there to get. It was a 10-team league, 4 playoff spots. So the playoffs started next week. And that was a league, if you remember, I mentioned on the stream that I was taking a shot on playing Corey Davis over Tyler Lockett. So I don't feel horrible because of the fact that Lockett kind of did what I was worried about. He only got in that 7-point range. Problem is Davis had a worse game. Nonetheless, I won the matchup, but on points, this over the stretch of the entire season, 14 games, 0.4 the difference between fourth place and where I ended up in fifth place. So that one hurt quite a bit. So yeah, I if I had stuck with Lockett, I would have been in there and I would have made it. So just to lose out by 0.4 points on the same record, 8-5 for both of us for the season, that was just awful. But these things happen. And hey, it's fantasy football. We all do our best, but sometimes they don't go the way we want them to. So at any rate, thank you again, Daniel, for being with us on the stream again. Glad to have you back, one of our regulars. And looks like you're moving on in your playoffs. So hopefully you can go on and crush it again this week. All right, we got a chat here from Zach Conroe. Welcome back, Zach. Glad to have you back on our stream. You say, hey, what's up? Pick 2 in a full PPR league. Woods, Deontay Johnson, CD, and Jefferson. All right, well, let's do this. Let's take a look at some matchups for you here. Let me get my other screen up here, and I will put up our wide receiver graphic. These are current fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver position. We'll start out in the order that you presented them, and the first is Robert Woods. That is the L.A. Rams. That is a 4 o'clock game at home against the New York Jets. And they are in 7th on the left side of your screen in terms of fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So I think that's a decent possibility there. Then we move on to Deontay Johnson. Deontay had a case of the drops against my Buffalo Bills this week. Let's see what the matchup looks like for him. Pittsburgh, Monday night on the road at Cincinnati. Should be another good matchup there. Cincinnati 17th, so right in the middle in terms of fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. I don't know if that's so much about their secondary as it is about the fact that they're probably trailing in most games, and a lot of teams run the ball against them. So probably they're giving up more points on the running side potentially there. Still a pretty decent matchup. CD Lamb for the Dallas Cowboys. That is a home game, 1 p.m. against San Francisco on Sunday. San Francisco currently allowing the 20th in terms of fantasy points to wide receivers. So just before halfway point there, 13th fewest. And then Justin Jefferson. Let's see here. Minnesota. Where are we? Minnesota. Home game against Chicago. 1 p.m. In Minnesota. Chicago, obviously a tough defense. 30th on the list there. 3rd fewest fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver spot. So that's a tough one there because my gut says that Jefferson's been so good. He's a guy that I definitely would want to start. I think Woods is for sure one of your starters there. Let me do something here. Let's look up Justin Jefferson. I want to get the stats in front of me because I believe the first time these two teams played, I think he crushed them actually against the Bears, even though they're a tough matchup. So that might actually potentially play into your decision here. So in the first game between these two, it was week 10. That was a game at Chicago. Minnesota won that game 19-13. Jefferson, 10 targets, 8 catches, 135 yards. On a half-point screen that I'm looking on, that's 17.5 fantasy points. If you tack on, it would be another 4 points in full PPR, so it would be 21.5 if it was a full PPR. So perhaps that means you might be able to actually trust Jefferson, even though it's a tough matchup. Again, this kind of falls along the line of the kind of things that I like to talk about here in terms of talent, volume, matchup, and game script. And the reason why I put them in that order is because sometimes you get that guy that's such an elite player, and Jefferson is certainly starting to look that way in his rookie year, that he may overcome those bad matchups. And certainly he had a good game against the Bears before. That's my initial gut, is that certainly Jefferson is not a bad choice here. I'm going to look up the stats for Deontay Johnson. I do want to see how many, well, let's see, it's not working that way. Let's try it a different way. I do want to see how many targets he had in that game against Buffalo. I know it wasn't all that great of a game from what you've come to expect from Johnson. 7 targets, 4 catches, 40 yards, 6 points on a half-point PPR. If you tack on another 2, it would have been 8. Yeah, that's going to depend on how you feel about where Johnson's been at. I will say this, James Conner is looking like he's banged up, and certainly we've seen Pittsburgh kind of want to throw the ball already. So I do think that that's in the realm of possibility for Johnson there. I would probably shy more away from CD Lamb than anybody, just because the Dallas offense we just haven't seen it there. And again, I don't have the points that CD put up this last week right in front of me. Let me go ahead and call that up as well, and just to make sure that I'm not misspeaking in terms of what he did last week. So CD Lamb at Cincinnati, 2 targets, 2 catches. It was 46 yards, 7.10 and a half-point PPR screen. He must have had some running added into that. But again, yeah, that's not great. And again, San Francisco, not a great matchup either. San Francisco, always a tough defense. I probably shy away from Lamb in this particular one. I think it's definitely Woods for sure. Great matchup there. I think Deontay Johnson and Jefferson is kind of a coin flip situation for you. In that situation, me personally, I might lean towards Jefferson just because he's been so good, but I can certainly see the argument for Johnson because you always have the possibility with Minnesota that they're leaning on Dalvin Cook and not necessarily throwing the ball quite as much. I think Woods for sure. I think Johnson and Jefferson is a toss-up for me. I probably lean Jefferson, but I would say between those two guys, go with your gut. And as I always say, whichever guy you pick there, I do hope that they crush it for you. And Zach Conroe, thank you again for being with us on the stream. And awesome to have you back again. Got a couple more here to go by. So let me get Marco Rodriguez. Marco, welcome to the stream. I'm not sure if you've been with us before or if you're new, but either way, glad to have you here. You say Michael Thomas, Justin Jefferson, Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, DJ Chark need 2+ flex. All right, all wide receivers here. So we can put up the wide receiver list on the left side of your screen. And let's go through the matchups. Michael Thomas for New Orleans, home against Kansas City. That is a 4:25 Sunday game. The matchup for Kansas City there, let's see where they fall. Second fewest, 31st. A tough matchup for Thomas. Obviously, he's a top player. However, we've seen, a little bit of uncertainty when it comes to Taysom Hill as your quarterback. Justin Jefferson, we just talked about him. But again, the matchup there, home against Chicago, another tough one, third fewest as far as the Bears allowing to wide receivers. Amari Cooper, again, this Dallas, home against San Francisco, 1 o'clock Sunday. San Fran, a lot of tough matchups so far along this run, 20th. So 13th fewest. It's the best we've seen out of these so far. Deontay Johnson here. Again, we talked about him for Pittsburgh. I should know what's going on here because I just saw him. Yep, it's the Monday night game. Cincinnati, they're 17th on the list there, so midway point. And DJ Chark for the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are, where are they here? Sunday, 1 p.m. at Baltimore. Baltimore on your list in 24th. So the 9th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So you're looking at 2+ a flex here. I think probably a lot of tough matchups going here. I feel like actually Jefferson and Johnson are both in play for you here. I don't know how you sit Michael Thomas because he's just too good of a player. And again, the talent level, you would expect that potential is there to have a nice game, even though he hasn't necessarily had as many good games with Taysom Hill there. So my gut says with these, Thomas, Jefferson, Johnson, Dallas offense obviously been struggling. The wild card here is DJ Chark. They're going back to Gardner Minshew, so I do think that there's better days ahead for DJ Chark than what we've seen while they've been going through that quarterback shuffle thing that they were doing here. I did not like him with Mike Glennon at all, but I think that he is a wild card in this situation. However, I don't know who you potentially start him over because I'd be hard pressed to feel like putting him ahead of Thomas, Jefferson, or Deontay Johnson here would be awesome. I don't know how much you love that play. Again, the matchups are tough. The Jefferson matchup is tough, third fewest. The Johnson matchup is a little bit better, and the Thomas with the Taysom Hill thing. But to me, I'm probably looking at those three guys, feeling a little bit safer about those. But again, anything can happen in these matchups. I feel like those are the three that I would look at in terms of going with my gut thought there. But again, as I always say, you guys, your rosters as good as anybody. Hopefully, I presented you with a little bit of information to back that up so that you can make the best decision possible. And obviously, we always hope that it works out for the best. Marco Rodriguez, thank you again for being on the stream. Appreciate all you guys being in the chat. And absolutely, we hope whichever you guys you pick there that you crush it. All right, before I get to the next chat, let me go ahead and put up a quick promo here for you guys. And I want to remind you that our main show is the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. And that is every Sunday at 12 noon, taking you right up until game time. Same deal as this, answering all your fantasy football questions and getting you ready for your matchups each week. For those of you, if you have not been on the show yet, by all means, would love to have you on that stream as well. And obviously, tonight we did a little special show tonight. So these are just as much fun getting to talk fantasy football with you guys. But that is our Sunday show. Also, we'll put up the information here in terms of who we are, the Fantasy Follow. We're a brand new channel on YouTube this year. So those of you that have been with us already throughout the season, we appreciate you being here. If you're a new viewer, be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you can get those notifications whenever we have new content. We are a newer channel, so we don't always come up quite as high in the searches. But if you did find us, you might have had to dig a little farther to find us. We appreciate you being here, and we're glad that you did. We're also on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow. That's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can always send us your fantasy football questions to our Twitter account during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer those live on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook/The Fantasy Follow and website, thefantasyfollow.com. All right, back to the chat. We've got some other content to go through, but as long as we have chat, we always try to go to that first. We appreciate having you guys here, and we'd rather be talking with you than just talking to you. So let's take a look at the next one. It's from A.B. Goldberger. Welcome back, A.B. Goldberger. Appreciate you being on the stream, one of our regulars. And you say, you told me to start T.Y. over Debo, and I didn't, and I lost by the difference. Oh, no. That's tough. Well, you know what? Again, this is I shared that little story about my one league, you know, where I actually lost out on from 4th place to 5th place to make the playoffs by 0.4 points over the course of the entire season. So, unfortunately, this is what fantasy football is about. I always kind of like to say it's a lot like poker. You know, when you're playing poker, you have your cards, you know what you have, you know what's on the board. You try to figure out what your opponent has, and hopefully you make the right decisions. And sometimes you're ahead and you get outdrawn and the cards fall your opponent's way. And unfortunately that happens. It sucks, especially when it's in the playoffs. So yeah, that's a rough one there. I wish it would have worked out better for you, AB. I hope that at least possibly that wasn't your playoff matchup, and perhaps that was like a week before the playoffs and you might have still made it. So hopefully you might have got in there. If not, hey, either way, like I said, you got to make those decisions on what you feel are best. And, you know, you did that and you went with it. And I don't think that Debo was a terrible start. You know, when a player gets injured, what are you going to do? And it just so happens that T.Y. did go have a great game. So, you know, sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. I wish you would have gotten that win, A.B. Goldberger. But again, appreciate you being on the stream. And hopefully either in other leagues or perhaps still in that league, you're still playing for something this week. And Daniel says, brutal when that happens. Yes, I agree. That is it's always rough. And we follow up with a couple here before I move on to the next new one here. Zach Conroe, you say appreciate it. And I say no, thank you for being here. Again, without you guys on the stream, we're just presenting content, and we'd much rather be talking with you guys than to you. And from Marco Rodriguez, thanks, Joe. I'm thinking Thomas and Jefferson locks on talent. I agree. Appreciate your insight. And again, glad that you have you on the stream here with us. And absolutely, as I always say, I hope whichever guys you choose, I do hope that they crush it. All right, we got a chat here from Bobby Schmerda, one of our regulars. Welcome back, Bobby Schmerda, to the stream. You ask Thielen, or this time I know what MT means, Michael Thomas. I'm glad I got that sorted out from last year or from last week's streams. PPR, you want to know Adam Thielen or Michael Thomas? Another tough Michael Thomas decision. Always difficult here. Let's put up the matchups on the left side of your screen. We'll start with Thielen. That's who you presented first. So Minnesota, home against Chicago, a tough matchup. Chicago, the third fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Michael Thomas, their matchup is, and just to follow up on that, Minnesota, that's a 10 o'clock Sunday game because these game times are always important, obviously, especially when you've got games on multiple days as we do this week. I'm looking for New Orleans. There they are. 4:25 home game against Kansas City. Kansas City, they are second fewest. Ooh, this is a tough. This sucks. Wow, Bobby, this is a tough decision here. I gotta think that between these two, I probably like Michael Thomas. You picked him in the first round of your draft here. Most likely he was your first pick, or potentially around the corner your second pick in your league. Even though it's Taysom Hill throwing the ball, both of the matchups are bad. So if you consider the matchups a wash and you move up that rung and you talk about ability, I got to think that Michael Thomas, even though Adam Thielen has been great, he is that second, that higher tier guy. What I want to do here, I already talked about earlier about that Justin Jefferson had a great game against Chicago. I want to look up and see what Thielen did last time against Chicago, because my thought here is perhaps Chicago has keyed more on Adam Thielen as their top guy in terms of wide receivers, and that's why Jefferson had such a nice game last time. And no, actually, I'm wrong. Week 10, at Chicago. Adam Thielen, 7 targets, 4 catches, just 43 yards, but 2 touchdowns. That was 18.30 points in a half-point PPR format. If you tack on it, would be another extra 2. It would have been 20.3 in a full PPR format. So Thielen also had a nice game against Chicago. Let me go on ahead back and take a look on the Michael Thomas side of things here real quick. Let's see. This is a really rough spot. Thomas obviously has not been great since Taysom Hill has been there. A better week this past week. Still had 8. Well, I guess I shouldn't say this wasn't a bad game against Philly. 8 targets, 8 catches, didn't have a touchdown, but 84 yards, 12.4 and a half point PPR, and then tack on 4 more if it's full. So that's 16.4. So certainly not bad. You have to think in this game, well, there's 2 things you have to think. One, you expect a higher scoring game, probably, being that you're playing Kansas City, and at the very least, Kansas City potentially, if New Orleans plays as poorly as they played this past week, then they're going to be forced to throw the ball to catch up from behind. However, Kansas City has been a little bit more vulnerable to the run, and that brings Alvin Kamara into the picture as potentially being the guy that gets it done for that team. I think that might sway potentially your decision more towards Adam Thielen, and the fact that Thielen did play well against Chicago the last time. It's a tough spot. I have a hard time sitting Michael Thomas at all if I picked him in my first round of my draft. But I could. Oh, I see a follow-up here. You say rest of the season. Well, that does change things a little bit here. Let me go ahead and call them both up because I'm not sure who they have in week 16. So let me bring up both of these guys and let's take a look. So Thielen, let's see. He has, after this week's game, he then has New Orleans in week 6. Well, that makes it easy. They're playing each other. Again, New Orleans, 23rd there on the left side of your screen, so 10th fewest of the wide receiver spot. Not an awesome matchup. And on the flip side of that, Minnesota, 3rd most of the wide receiver spot. So, yeah, I think, for sure Michael Thomas has the matchup advantage in that next week. Perhaps I'm assuming this is your playoffs, this might be one of those situations where you want to take a look at your opponent for this week and see if there are any factors in play that make you lean one way or the other. Are there any players in common? Like, are you playing a Dalvin Cook? Does that potentially change your opinion? Because then if it's a super high scoring game, potentially they're both getting points. Or are you playing an Alvin Kamara, or are either of the quarterbacks involved? To me, this week, the matchups are not great for either. I have a hard time sitting Thomas, but I'm thinking that Thielen is not necessarily a terrible choice for this week, and probably Thomas the week after might get the edge. So yeah, just it's a couple of tough decisions. I hope some of that information helps, again, making that decision. And as I always say, that I hope whatever players you pick, I hope they crush it. I'll be watching potentially Thielen this week and potentially MT the week after that. Again, thank you, Bobby Shmurda, for being back with the stream. Appreciate all of the regulars. Let me go up real quick. Let's put up this comment for everybody that's on the stream that I haven't got to yet. Let you know that the live chat is open for the remainder of our live stream tonight, answering your fantasy football questions all show long. Even if we get into our other content or if we're answering other questions, feel free, jump in the chat. Drop us your question, and we'll try to get to those as soon as we can. That's obviously what we're here for, and that's the main thoughts of these shows, especially when you're talking about your playoffs. We'll get into our waiver wire picks later on, but we can deal with that after we get through all of your chats. So, all right, let's get back into the next one. Let me see. Follow-up from A.B. Goldberger. You say it was the playoffs, but at least I can put up a clean sweep, 3-0 on one of my friends in the fifth place game. Absolutely. You gotta get those wins wherever you can. So even if it's the 5th place game, it never hurts to get a W. It always feels good. So again, thank you, AB. Sorry that win couldn't come through for you for this week, but again, glad to have you on the stream. We got Takashi 6400. What's up, bro? What's up, Takashi? Glad to have you back on the stream again. Another one of our regulars here. And let's take a look at your question. You say Kyler Murray or Jalen Hurts. All right, let's talk through this one. Let's put up the fantasy points to the quarterback spot, and over on my other screen, let me get up the matchups in front of me so I can take a look at both sides of this. I can tell you where my gut is already off of this, but it never hurts to look at the matchups before putting forth an opinion. We'll start with Kyler Murray because that's who you mentioned first. Arizona, that's Sunday. Hey, look, it's the same game. Sunday, 4:05 in Arizona against Philadelphia. Philadelphia, let's see where they fall on the list. 21st. So that is actually 12th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot, just below the bottom half. Jalen Hurts, Arizona, let's see where they fall on the list. 20th. So again, right in that same range, right next to each other. Again, this falls into that category of the four things that I talk about: ability, volume, game matchup, and game script. In that order, to me, I think that Kyler Murray is the player that you trust more in terms of a higher tier player. I know that Jalen Hurts had a nice game in his first week, but it's still first week for basically a new quarterback still feeling his way out in the NFL. A lot of rushing yards. I feel like the game that he had this last week against New Orleans, you might be able to chalk up to when you get a player that teams don't have tape on yet. You don't exactly know how to prepare for them. I feel like teams may be able to look back towards that game and get a little bit more information, and perhaps Hurts still has a decent game, but who knows, maybe not necessarily as great of a game. Certainly the run game for these quarterbacks, I mean, this is the future of these quarterbacks in fantasy football. Look at all the guys that are crushing it for you because of their run potential. You're talking about Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts potentially in the future, Josh Allen, what he's been doing. Like, this produces your floor for your quarterback position. It's so nice to have that player there. Certainly Murray probably hasn't been running it quite as much since he had that shoulder injury. But I think between these two players, again, you're this far into your season, you're in your fantasy football playoffs. And again, I saw a quote this week talking about, your big name players, they got you to your playoffs. They're going to get you to week 16 also. So I think in this situation, you probably lean on that guy that you've trusted all year long. And for me, I'm guessing that's Kyler Murray. Again, it could certainly always go the other way. But in terms of which way are you going to feel worse about here, if you take a shot on Hurts and Murray plays great, or if you keep in your main guy Hurts or Murray and perhaps Hurts plays a little better, to me, you're probably going to feel worse if you take Murray out of that lineup and he ends up playing really well for you. He's had a really good season. I know there's been some down weeks, but I'm thinking here that, the bottom line is this is the guy you drafted as your main quarterback for the season, and you're getting into your main games where you really need to win. You probably lean on that player at this point. So I'm gonna say probably Kyler there. Again, as I always say, fantasy football is all about opinions. I try to give you some information to back up your decision. If it comes down to it and, you feel like you'd rather go the other way, trust your gut. But I think Kyler Murray is a fine start here. And I do see that Bobby Schmurda, you jump in there and you say Kyler as well. Like I always say, hopefully whichever guy you pick, I do hope that they crush it. And hopefully that gets you through into your playoffs towards that league championship. All right. Thank you, Takasu6400, for being on the stream again. Appreciate you being in the chat here. I do see another one here from you. It says, should I go Michael Pittman, Antonio Brown, or Marvin Jones standard? All right, let's tackle this one. Let's put up some points to the wide receiver position. We'll start with Michael Pittman against Houston, 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. I've seen a lot of teams have had some good performances against that team in terms of the pass game recently. Antonio Brown for Tampa Bay. Where are we at here? On the road against Atlanta. It's a 1 p.m. Sunday game. Atlanta, the 2nd most points to the wide receiver spot. And then Marvin Jones for Detroit. That's on the road against Tennessee. Should be a good matchup there. Yeah, 6th most in terms of fantasy points to wide receivers. And that's a Sunday 1 p.m. game. My thoughts are this. I don't feel that any of these are huge blowaway, like this is the guy you have to play here. I think Pittman has been playing all right, but we have seen with the emergence of T.Y. Hilton in past weeks that Pittman most likely has not been seeing as much of the work. I'm going to look up his stats real quick just to back that thought up, because I'm not sure exactly what he had for points this past week, but I do want to take a look at that. Let's see here. And a half-point PPR screen, 5 targets, 2 catches, 42 yards, 5.5 points. You would tack on another one if it's full. You said this is standard, so you'd actually subtract 1. So he had 4.5 points for you in a standard league. On the Antonio Brown side, I'm not high in Antonio Brown. I haven't been at all this year, not because he's not talented, but I just feel like it's hard to start Antonio Brown until you actually see it work out for him one of these weeks. And so far, we really haven't. Even this past week for Tampa, I thought Mike Evans was in line for a great day, and Scotty Miller ends up with that touchdown. Obviously, Brady is kind of in that mode where whoever's open. He certainly doesn't seem to be forcing it to any of the particular guys there. This last week for Brown, it was 5 targets. Did have all 5 of those catches, 49 yards, 7.4. That's my half-point screen here. So for you in a standard league, you subtract 2.5, and that brings you down to 4.9 points was all he got you in this last week. So that brings us to Marvin Jones. With Marvin Jones, here's the deal. Keep an eye on your reports. That's going to be the key to making this decision, because I feel like if Matthew Stafford plays, he probably has the edge at this point. The matchup for Jones this week at Tennessee, it's a good matchup, 6th most. I know the matchup is a little bit better for Tampa Bay, but again, we've seen a little bit more production out of Marvin Jones. And again, if you're taking a look at your reports, we don't expect Kenny Galladay to play again this week. And Stafford, it's not sure right now, but if he is able to gut through that injury, if he's not, it's going to be Chase Daniel. You take a tick down for Jones there. But you look at his production in the last few weeks. He has had 28 targets now over the last 3 weeks. This last game against Green Bay, it was 8 targets, 4 catches, just 48 yards. So not a great game, but he has had a little bit more opportunity based on the targets. You would expect that to continue because of the fact that, they really don't have their number one guy there. In Brown's case, a lot of other mouths to feed. In Pittman's case, still other mouths to feed. I would probably, my gut thought here is Jones, but that changes as this week goes on. So that might be a Tuesday answer. We'll see what happens as that week goes on, but keep an eye on reports. I feel like I lean Jones. I feel like that might be potentially the best, but as I always say, whichever guy, go with what you feel is best for your roster if you're on the fence at all. But I feel like Marvin Jones potentially is a fine start there. And Bobby, you jump in and you say Marvin as well. I feel like that's a potential, but keep an eye on those reports because that can change as the week goes on. All right. Thank you, Takashi. And I see your follow-up here. I'm also thinking Jones, but I don't know. Yeah, I would say, and you say Stafford is hurt. Yep, absolutely. That is the deal there. Keep an eye on what's going on with your reports. That's gonna play into that quite a bit as this week goes on. All right, Takashi 6400. Again, thank you for the chat. Let's see the next one here we got from, I'm going to try on this name, Carlos Orozco. And if I got that right, let me know. And if I got it wrong, then also let me know because I like to try to get these names correct. Carlos looks like he might be a new viewer to the stream. So if so, welcome. Glad to have you aboard. And you say Cam Akers or Chris Carson and whoever remains, Michael Thomas or them. I might need a little bit of explanation on what you mean there about whoever remains. I think what you're trying to tell me here is like this is like a pick 2, it sounds like. And the first pick is going to be perhaps for your RB2 spot. And then the next pick is going to be for your flex spot. So tell me if I got that right. Just drop me a chat. I'm going to assume that's what you're looking at here. And if it's not, then just let me know and I'll revisit that. All right. So let's take a look at some matchups here. First, let's look at the running back side of that. Cam Akers obviously had a great game last week. I do want to take a look at his exact points there in that game. I know he had a big one. Certainly we've been expecting him to come on as the year goes on. 29 rush attempts, 171 yards in a half-point screen that I'm looking at. It was 20.40. Let's see if he had any catches. He did 2 additional catches. So if you're playing PPR, that would have been 21.40. If you're playing standard, that would have been 19.40. Either way, a great game. And this week's matchup, the New York Jets, home game for them. The Jets currently allowing, 12th most fantasy points to the running back spot. So certainly that is a great matchup. Obviously, the concern in LA is always the other players in that backfield. Do they stick with Akers because of that big game, or is this more of a hot hand approach there? And perhaps Malcolm Brown's Darrell Henderson are in the mix. Actually, I'm not even sure I'm going to check and see if they're both healthy before I continue with that decision. Chris Carson, this is a Sunday 1 p.m. game at Washington. And Washington, not as good of a matchup. So 29th, that's the 4th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. The difference there being that Carson is going to be your main guy. So again, as we talk about these 4 factors, ability, volume, matchup, game script, you feel more confident in the volume than you do still with Cam Akers. Even though he had that great game, you still kind of don't know what happens there. I do want to call up and make sure. What I'm going to do is take a look at the Rams offense just to see if all 3 of those are still in the fold and healthy, or if there are any potential reports. I don't see a report for Henderson. I don't see a report for Brown. So all three of them still in the mix. Let's see what they did this past game to see what kind of workload that they had. Brown only had, did not even have a carry this last game. Didn't have a single touch. So that does make a difference there. If they didn't even give him a touch, that makes you a little more confident about Akers. And as far as Henderson, let's see what he did. Henderson, just 2 carries for 5 yards, 7 touches you saw for Henderson. So, all right. I mean, that does make you feel more comfortable with the Akers side of things, that he got that overwhelmingly the involvement over those other guys. So I feel that makes you less hesitant to go with him at this point. Again, you have to prepare yourself if you're going to take that Akers side of things for the potential that it doesn't go that way. That's just simply part of it. With Carson, at least you know that you expect the volume to be there. However, the matchup much more difficult for Carson than it is Akers. So to me, I'm thinking, oh boy, now when you throw Michael Thomas into that mix, let's go ahead and look at his wide receiver stats. Thomas for New Orleans, 4 of 25 home game. Kansas City, the second fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. I will say this, Carlos, if you are in a situation where you feel that your actual matchup might play a role in how you make this decision, if you feel that you need to swing for the fences a little bit, perhaps your opponent, I'm guessing this is your playoff matchup, perhaps you're playing an opponent that has a phenomenal team. Maybe they're projected more points than you possibly are. I think you have the most potential upside between here with Akers and Carson, actually. And I'm interested to know if you're playing PPR or standard, because if you're playing standard, that is even more the reason that you could potentially put either one of those guys over or Michael Thomas. If it's PPR, that probably swings you back to Thomas for your flex. To me, the matchup is clearly better for Cam Akers, and he had such a great game. You perhaps have to ride him at this point and hope for the best. And again, just be prepared that what happens with if Darrell Henderson gets off to a great start and for some reason Akers doesn't see the volume, that's always a possibility. That's the unfortunate part of making this decision. I do like Carson. I've liked Carson all year. I think he has the ability to overcome tough matchups. This obviously is one against Washington. But I do think he has that ability. Michael Thomas on the flip side of things, the matchup is not great. Kansas City, the second fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but he is Michael Thomas. So unfortunately, what I'm getting at here is this is really close between all these three. And that's not an answer that helps you out much at all. But I'm just trying to talk this through and hope that some of these things, kind of lean you one way or the other. I'm thinking. For me, I don't have Cam Akers in any leagues. I do have Chris Carson in a couple of spots, and I've been really high on Carson for several years now. So for me personally, I have that personal bias towards Carson that makes me want to lean towards him a little bit more. But it may be different for you. And so if it is because of that big game that Akers had, I cannot fault you for taking him over Carson at this point, and I cannot fault you, especially if it's PPR, for taking Thomas over either one of them. I do think that if it's standard, there's a really good argument for you to go Akers and Carson both, but it is tough to put Michael Thomas on your bench. So again, take a look at your opponents and let me see if there are any follow-ups here from you. First of all, you say I got it right with the name. Awesome. And you said the second pick is for flex and you say PPR. So yeah, if it's PPR, then I feel you probably got to get Michael Thomas in there. I mean, this past week, even though they didn't play great, 8 targets, 8 catches, that's a free 8 points that you're not necessarily getting from either one of those other guys. Again, swinging for the fences. Let me put the original question back up so that anybody else that's watching knows what we're talking about. If you're swinging for the fences here, I think Akers has the potential bigger game than Carson does. A better matchup. If you're more concerned with your floor, then there might be more of an argument for Carson because you might trust his volume more. So I guess it kind of depends on what you're potentially looking for in that matchup. Again, I would say the better of the two matchups is Akers, but usually you do want to take volume over matchup. So there's an argument either way. My gut is going to say Akers because of the potential big game there, and I'm going to assume being that it's the playoffs, you're playing another tough team, you might need the bigger game. Just be prepared. to kind of sit there and chew away your fingernails, wondering if he's going to get the work, because you just never know. But certainly it's a good matchup. If he gets off to a good start, he should be in good shape. So yeah, I hope that helps, Carlos. Again, I always want to present information so that if you're watching along, and you say, you say to yourself, oh, that kind of makes sense. Or if you're like, no, I don't know if I like it that way. I want you to be able to make that best decision for you. And I always say, whichever guys you pick, I hope that they crush it. But Carlos Orozco, thank you for being with us. And you say definitely swinging for the fences this week. So yeah, from what I said, then you're thinking what I'm thinking. Then perhaps Cam Akers is that swing for the fences. And again, you just have to keep it, sometimes those guys that are long ball hitters, sometimes they strike out too. So it's a tough one, but I want to know what happens in this one. Let's put it this way. I hope that whichever guy you pick crushes it, and I'm very interested to see how this one works out. I want you to make those playoff wins and move it on. All right, Carlos, thank you for being with us on the stream. Again, if you are a new viewer, make sure and click that subscribe button. Get those notifications whenever we have new content. I want to make sure all you guys that are new are able to get those moving forward. All right, let me see who's next here. And again, I always want to say this because as we start to go through these chats, I'm literally scrolling up and down on my streaming service here. So if I miss a chat, it's not on purpose. Please let me know that I missed you, and I will go back and find it. I don't want to miss anybody's chat, but again, sometimes as I'm scrolling up and down, I do miss them. So if I do that, please let me know, and I will go back and get them as best as I can. I do see the next one here, I think, from Colton Cash, one of our regulars. Welcome back, Colton. Glad to have you on the stream. You say pick 2, Kyler, Tannehill, Brady, or Big Ben. Looks like this is a super flex or perhaps a 2 QB league. So let's put up fantasy points allowed to the quarterback spot, and let's take a look at these matchups. Starting in the order you presented them, Kyler Murray, home, 405 against Philadelphia. Philadelphia allowing they're 21st on the list, so they're allowing the 12th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Ryan Tannehill for Tennessee's been playing great. Home against Detroit seems like a better matchup. 7th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. It is in the green there, as you see. Tom Brady. Let's see here. Brady, what time we got that game at? That's a 1 o'clock game on the road against Atlanta. Atlanta, the very most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. And Big Ben Roethlisberger, Monday night on the road against Cincinnati, 18th, right about halfway there. That's actually the 15th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. This is an interesting one. I think I'm going to eliminate Big Ben first because I think there have been some games where you've expected him to play better than he has, and just not really sure why that is. I don't know if that's a function of where the Steelers are at right now or not, but I do want to call up their stats as I talk this through just to make sure that I'm not misspeaking on any of these. So I'm going to start with Ben. I think he's the guy that I rule out, but I do want to look at his numbers from these past couple of weeks. 15.48 points. He hasn't had a game over 20 points in 4 games at this point, even though he's had, in terms of attempts, 46, 51, 53, and 37. So he's been throwing it all over the place and still isn't getting to 20 points. I probably trust him less out of these 4. Let's move on to Murray, and let's look at his numbers. This is a little bit tougher matchup in terms of the fantasy points being allowed here. I don't feel like the Eagles scare you as much here, but still in terms of what the stats say, not as great. He actually hasn't been over 20 points in the last 3 games, although he has been 17 and 18 the last 2. 4 touchdowns in the last 2 games. I don't think he's a bad choice for this. Tannehill is obviously a good matchup here and has been playing great. I feel like that it's going to be – you're hard-pressed not to go with him at this point, but let's look at the numbers. Now, I guess it wasn't quite as great this last week. He's had – the touchdowns are amazing. 5 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. Week 13 against Cleveland, it was 28.56 fantasy points. They were down big in that game. Jacksonville, 16.48. This was a Derrick Henry game. So Detroit is absolutely bleeding points to running backs. You have to figure that they're crushing Detroit, and Derrick Henry gets a lot of the work. Perhaps that brings Tannehill's down a tick for the same reason why it was down a tick last week. Not because he isn't playing well, but simply game script. You expect him to be leading in that game. You expect Detroit to put up very little resistance to the run game. That's a potential for him. Brady, let's see. 15.64 this last week, 23 the week before. I expected him to have a better game this past week. This is the first time these two teams have played, so nothing to go on there. But clearly Atlanta is number one on our list right there. So if you're going to go by matchups, I don't think that's a bad choice by any means. I will probably this is between those three. It's kind of really close. My gut right off the bat says Kyler and Brady. That's just like a gut reaction to this because I'm worried about the game script that Tannehill might not need to throw the ball nearly as much in that game. And you don't necessarily feel like that's the case in the other two. I really think that, it's a home game in Tennessee against Detroit. I'm going to put up the running back stats in terms of Detroit. They are the number one in terms of fantasy points to running backs. I feel like there's a good chance it ends up being in that same situation. And the odds of another game like it was against Cleveland where they're down a ton and they have to throw the ball for the rest of the game, you wouldn't think that would be the case. So I guess I'm leaning Kyler and Brady in these two. But I think it's real close. I think Ben is probably the odd man out. And this might be one of those where I'm kind of saying to you, take the information and, if you like a Tannehill Brady combination better or a Kyler Tannehill combination better, then, I don't fault you at all. But I think it's two of those three. I will say Kyler and Brady as fine starts. But again, like I always say, your roster better than anybody. So yeah, go with, if you don't feel quite that's the way and you go another way, obviously I always say whichever guys you pick, I hope that you crush it. And you say free Bobby. I'm not sure what that means, but I put it up there at any rate. And I see another follow-up from here. So I will continue with your follow-ups before I go to the next question. And you say also pick two. Again, Carson, Sanders, Montgomery. Appreciate it, man. And I say no. Appreciate you guys all being on the stream. Glad to have you on. Let's put up the numbers to the running back spot. Let's go through this. We'll start with Carson. All right, let me get back to my screen with all the matchups here on my other screen. Again, Carson playing against Washington. It's not a great matchup, but I do always like Carson for his volume. I looked up too many different players, and now I'm way off of my other screen, but I'll get there eventually. It's only I don't know, it's not too late tonight, so at least it's not middle of the night yet. All right, Seattle. Come on. Well, I know they're playing Washington. I'll get that screen up in a second. Fourth fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. That game is at 1 p.m. on Sunday. Again, not a great matchup, but you like the volume there for Carson. Philadelphia on the road against Arizona. Arizona giving up, let's see where they are on the list, 17th. So right at the midway point. Obviously, Miles Sanders had a great game last week. An interesting case here. 2 weeks ago, if you watch our Sunday pregame show, I had Miles Sanders as my top start at the running back spot, and he put up a stinker. And so then I moved him to the sit list for the next week because I was like, all right, well, I guess you can't trust Miles Sanders anymore. And then he has a great game. So, hey, fantasy football, yay. I mean, this is what happens. But what is he going to do this week? Who knows? You got to think it's better. The things that have to have changed because of that Jalen Hurts being in the starting lineup there. So perhaps you trust him a little bit more. Montgomery on the road at Minnesota, 1 p.m. on Sunday. 20th most fantasy points to the running back spot, a little bit lower down for him. I think that, Montgomery, you expect to get all the work there. Sanders is still probably a little bit more of a question mark, even though he had that great game. I mean, is there some reason why it reverts to him not getting as much work that you've been getting? Carson doesn't have as good of a matchup, but I think Carson has the edge in ability. And also, I feel that game script-wise, there might be a better chance that Seattle has more of a lead for more of that game and they run the ball more. So these are all factors when you make that decision. On the Montgomery side of things, you wouldn't expect that in that game. I wouldn't think that Minnesota is getting blown out by any means. It's just a middling matchup. I've liked Montgomery a lot, but he's had a couple of great games in a row. And is there potential for regression there? I'm not sure. I think as I'm working my way through talking this out, I think that probably if it were me, Carson and Sanders, I'm a little bit hesitant to say that because the matchup probably you got to put Sanders probably number one here, even though it's been a little iffy because that last game was so good and because it's Jalen Hurts. It seems like you can trust him more, but this is one of those where you could easily make these picks, pick two of these guys and start watching the games, and all of a sudden you're like, oh no, what's going on here? My gut is Carson and Sanders. I feel like Carson is a higher tier player than Montgomery, so you potentially trust him more, even though it's a worse matchup. But I would not fault you for swapping out the other direction here since Montgomery has been so good recently. So again, this is one of those where my answer doesn't always necessarily come out like as an actual answer of who I'm picking, but more kind of like information to help you make that decision. I think Carson Sanders fine starts. I don't think Montgomery is a bad start either. So it might just be a little bit of a coin flip. And again, this might be a situation where you take a look at your opponent and see if there are any players in common that might sway you. Is there a Russell Wilson in your opponent's lineup to where you want to make sure that if it's a high-scoring game, you get a share of the points? Or probably not a Mitchell Trubisky. Perhaps that's the only player that would make a difference there in terms of your opponents. But, yeah, I guess if I have to give an answer, Carson Sanders. But, again, I don't feel like it's a huge difference. So if you go a different way, I don't fault you at any rate on any of those. Let me see if there are any follow-ups here before I move my way through. You say Sanders may go off. I agree with that. Takashi says Montgomery and Carson. These are all kind of the same things that I just talked through here. And Takashi agrees with Colton. That's for a different one. All right. So I think I got all of those. If I miss anything there, again, just let me know. But I hope that information helps. I know I didn't give you like super solid answers there, but that's just kind of the way I'm looking at it. I do think the Sanders is a potential there. And again, if you're swinging for the fences, that's upside in terms of how great of a game that he just had. So that could also sway your decision. Colton Cash, thank you for being on the stream. Appreciate the chat. And whichever guys you pick, I hope they crush it. All right. Again, if I miss anybody, please let me know. I'm trying to move down right in order and get everybody as they dropped in here. It looks like the next one to me here is from Chris Genova. Chris, welcome on the stream. I'm not sure if I recognize your name from before, so you may be new or you might be a return viewer. Either way, glad to have you with us. You say pick 2, Montgomery, Drake, Mike Davis, Cam Akers. All right, this is a nice set of players to talk about here. Let's take a look at fantasy points to the running back spot, and we will go through each of these matchups. We just talked about David Montgomery. That is 1 p.m. Sunday at Minnesota. Minnesota 20th on the left side of your screen in terms of fantasy points to the running back spot. Kenyon Drake, who I've been not high on all year, but he has seemed to have played a little bit better in these past weeks. This is a home game against Philadelphia. The matchup 23rd, so a little bit lower down, but still in the same range. The next name on your list is Mike Davis. This is a name that I've been very high on all year, and this is a great matchup. Saturday, 8:15 p.m. at Green Bay. Green Bay currently allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the running back spot. And then Cam Akers, we talked about already a little bit, home against the Jets Sunday. That is a 4:05 start time, and the Jets allowing the left side 12th most fantasy points to the running back spot. So Davis is only my first pick here. Grant, as long as McCaffrey doesn't play. Now let me do this just to help out and back up this information here. Let me pop this off the screen, and I'm going to run this soundbite for those of you that might not have seen it. But we did hear from Matt Rule today talking about McCaffrey's possibilities in this game. So perhaps this makes you feel a little bit more confident in your Mike Davis part of this decision. Here's Matt Rule.
I'm not expecting him to play as of right now. We'll see how the next couple of days unfold. Obviously, today was a walkthrough, so he was able to do some things, but I'm not expecting him to play as we sit here right now.
All right, so potentially that's going to play in as I put these graphics back up. That's going to play into my thought here on Mike Davis. I think Mike Davis is the matchup is great. He's going to have all the volume there as he has in most of the games. He had a great game this past week. I think Mike Davis is a guy that is a very solid start again this week. For your second pick there, again, this might be a situation of, are you looking for a floor? Are you looking for the potential upside? Cam Akers, after that big game, he has the best matchup of your other players that you're looking at there. The Jets in 12th on the left side of your screen there in terms of fantasy points to the running back spot. You have to assume that the Rams are leading most of that game, so that should make you safe in terms of game script. You would think that there would be plenty of work in the backfield for potentially even more than one of those guys if they do split it up. But for sure, if he has another big game going, then he probably keeps it running there. Montgomery has played well as of late, but the matchup is a little bit lower. It's 20th, just in the bottom half there. And Drake, again, has been a little bit better, but we've still had a lot of games where he's been kind of, what do we like there? So my gut there is Davis and Akers, and I do see a follow-up here, a couple of follow-ups. So let me get these up on the screen. Kamara as RB1, very solid there. Despite the Taysom Hill situation, he's still been getting his, with the exception of that Denver game. And you say half-point PPR. So let me just see if there are any other follow-ups that I'm missing. It looks like that's all of them. And I see a lot of other people in the chats, so stick with me. I will get to you guys. I think if I have to pick two here, again, as I always say, this is the reason why I have these matchup graphics. I want you guys to have enough information so that, you can listen to what I'm saying and either be like, hey, that makes some sense, or, no, I don't know if I want to go that way, and make that choice that works out best for you. As I always say, I hope whichever guys you pick, I hope they crush it. To me, I think Mike Davis, Cam Akers are fine starts there. I think the upside is there. I think Davis is a step ahead of all those other guys. I think I put him farther up in that number one spot. I think it's closer between the other guys, but I think probably Cam Akers, because of that huge game that you just saw. I think there's potential for another big game there in a good matchup. You probably lean towards that. And again, you're in your fantasy football playoffs, so you might need those huge points potentially if your floor situation is more what you need. And again, let me see if the game times might help you here. You're talking about, let's see, the Davis game is an early game, but the Rams game is a 4:05 game. The Drake game is a 4:05 game, and Montgomery is unfortunately 1 o'clock. So yeah, you do have to make that choice ahead of time. But to me, the matchup is there for Akers after the big game that you just saw. I think you might have to just go with it and just hope that for some reason something funny doesn't happen in that backfield. Because certainly if that matchup is there and he has anything close to what he had last week, he's going to put up big numbers. So I think those two are fine starts. Again, whoever you pick there, Chris Genova, I hope they crush it, and glad to have you on the stream with us tonight. All right, let me see here. And I see Colton Cash was following up on that same question, and he says Montgomery and Mike Davis. Yep, again, I can see an argument to go that way for sure. But I think Mike Davis is the linchpin in all of this. I think for sure he is definitely the top by far, and the other guys, there's more of an argument going between the two. So I think you trust Davis, and then obviously your next player is in your flex spot, so you're in good shape there. But thank you, Colton, for again, and I like when you guys. Takashi says I agree with Colton. I do like when you guys jump in here because again, this is all about opinion, and there's by no means do I think that my opinion is the only one out there. So I for sure like being able to talk these things through with you guys. I think it makes a difference, and perhaps whoever it is that's putting that question out there might get something from everybody here. So I do appreciate you guys jumping in with your thoughts. A. Aladdin back on the stream. Welcome back, A. Aladdin. Glad to have you here. You say Mostert or Jacobs. All right, so let's do this in this particular situation. Let me put up the headline that I had from earlier. Let's go ahead and find where I have that. This is Raheem Mostert. He actually went in for an MRI yesterday regarding his ankle injury. So there is some potential that Raheem Mostert doesn't play this week. I think anytime you're sending a guy for an MRI, that doesn't bode well. We know he's been a little bit banged up. So in terms of making this decision, this is something that you're going to need to take a look at as this week goes on. That might certainly, if there's no Mostert, this makes it an easy decision. Let's take a look at the running back points. If they are both playing, San Francisco on the road at Dallas, a great matchup. 6th most fantasy points to the running back spot. I'm always worried with San Francisco because there are so many running backs that they can use. You have to believe that Mostert is their number one guy. But if for some reason, let's say they keep him active and they decide, well, we're not sure if he's 100%. Let's go with somebody else. Let's feel out how the game goes. Dallas isn't playing that good. We might not need him this week. There's a lot of worrisome spots there. Josh Jacobs is a guy that I've liked a lot, and I know that he didn't have a great game this past week. Let me take a look at this matchup here. Las Vegas. So this is the Thursday night game, home against the Chargers. LA Chargers on your list, 13th most fantasy points to the running back spot. So not quite as high, not in the bottom half, still in the top half. Certainly you would expect Jacobs were he to be healthy, to be a little bit more of the work than he necessarily got in this last game. Let me call up his stats from this past weekend because I want to look at that a little more closely. I expected him to play better than he did for sure. And we didn't necessarily see that happen. So let's take a look. He is still listed as questionable for this game. He only had 16 touches last week. And let's see, 13 rushes, 49 yards, 3 of 5 targets. And in terms of a half-point PPR screen, he had 8.90 fantasy points. So not the typical Josh Jacobs great game that you're looking for. The note here does say he could have his workload limited again in week 15. I don't see anything to really back that up in terms of from coaching staff, or necessarily I don't see anything that says anything about whether or not he suffered a setback in this last game. That's going to be a tough one. I don't know if I'm not expecting Jacobs to get a full workload. I don't know which one of these guys I trust more, because again, the whole San Francisco thing, from past experience trying to play San Francisco running backs, I haven't this year. Didn't have any of them on my rosters just because it's a lot of times it's so tough. Let's see what these again. You got a Thursday night game, so wow, that sucks, because you're not really going to know if Mostert is healthy necessarily by Thursday. Oof, that's bad. Keep an eye on your reports the next couple of days. Wow, if you got to find out if a guy's going in for an MRI and you have a guy on Thursday night, I feel like you almost have to play him. Because if you don't play him and then Mostert's out, then you are stuck at that point. Unless you've got a great backup plan. That kind of says to me, yeah, wow, keep an eye on those reports. I would be more worried about the potential for Mostert not to play than worried about Jacobs's not being 100%. And if they're both less than 100%, then you gotta make sure you get some points out of that game. You don't end up with a 0. So that's my thoughts. I hope that one works out for you, Alad. And that is a tough spot to be in. But I would hate to be in your playoffs and end up with a 0, or end up like struggling to find someone on the waiver wire at that point. So that you might be forced to actually play Jacobs in that one. I hope that works out for you. Again, whichever guy, I hope you play, whichever guy you play, if it doesn't end up being Jacobs, I hope he puts up a monster game. Or if it's the other way, Mostert, because it's especially in a situation like this where it's a bad spot either way. Like, I would love to see whichever guy you go with just absolutely just crush it and make you feel good about the rest of your matchup. I do see another one here, Brady or Tannehill. Let me take a look back at these matchups again. To the quarterback spot, Tom Brady at Atlanta, 1 p.m. Sunday. Atlanta the first in terms of fantasy points allowed to the quarterback spot. Ryan Tannehill, that's a home game against Detroit. Also 1 o'clock, Detroit 7th in terms of fantasy points to the quarterback spot. So still a good matchup. I think either one of them here has an argument to be made for them. But what I will say is when you look at the other side of this game, the Tennessee game, and that's the running backs. This last game, it's not that Tannehill hasn't been playing well, but when Derrick Henry has these huge monster games, that impacts the upside for Tannehill. And Detroit is allowing the most fantasy points to the running back spot. So there is a reasonably good chance that Derrick Henry crushes them again this week. And also that Tennessee is leading for most of this game and not having to throw the ball quite as much. On the Brady side of things, I think there's more of a chance, especially if Julio Jones plays, that you could see more pass attempts in this game. Also keep in mind, I will put up this other, let me see, let's get this off the screen and see if this helps you out. There's another headline that might impact this for you, and that is Ronald Jones. Ronald Jones has gone in for surgery this week on a broken finger. For sure, he's been the guy in their backfield for quite some time here. That will probably mean Leonard Fournette, who was a healthy scratch last week, if Jones does miss this game. So does that potentially mean, especially because Fournette has been more of the pass catcher from Brady in terms of when he's played in the backfield. So does that potentially mean even more pass work for Brady? I think of these two, just based on all the things that I've just talked out. Again, I don't necessarily think that either one of these is in a bad spot, but I do think potentially you might have a little bit more upside out of Tom Brady, but I wouldn't fault you with either of these choices. And Colton Cash, you follow up with Brady here. Again, Aladdin, I would say whichever guy you go with here, whichever guy you pick, I hope that they crush it. I think they're both good starts, but I think Tom Brady is probably gets my gut on this one. And let me see you follow up here with, and I do see a lot of other chats here. I'm working my way through to you guys, so hang with us. Who is your top 5 running backs for 2021? Interesting question here, and something that we'll probably take a look on more as we roll through like the end of the playoffs and into next season. But off the top of my head, guys that come to mind, like I don't think Derrick Henry can ever be far from the top of that list. I think Dalvin Cook has been phenomenal. So this year, I don't see why there's any reason for that to be otherwise. I know he's had some injury concerns here and there, but I have to think you still put him in that boat. Alvin Kamara, I think, is a guy that you continue to put in that mix. I like Josh Jacobs. I always have. He's continuing to come along. Just thinking of other guys that are up there. I do think that Aaron Jones certainly merits being in that mix. Tell me if I'm missing other guys. Here's what I want to do. Let me put up let me see where these guys are rankings this year overall. I do think a guy that you look at next year, and I know he's out right now, but that's Antonio Gibson. He has been really good this year, and I don't know why that changes next year. You're not going to get him, at the same spot in the draft next year that you did this year. James Robinson, another guy that's going to be in that mix. I can't imagine why that changes for him. Right now, in terms of, I'm looking at a half-point PPR screen. Dalvin Cook is RB1, Kamara is RB2, Henry RB3, Robinson RB4, and Jones RB5. Gibson is down a little bit lower, but I do think that he's going to merit a little bit more than that next year because he hasn't necessarily played all the snaps, all the games this year. And Christian McCaffrey is going to come back from that injury. I don't have any question about that. So he's going to be in that mix. Those are a bunch of names that are possibilities. Don't ever slight Nick Chubb. I think Nick Chubb is phenomenal. He's missed a lot of time this year. It's probably going to be another situation next year where in your draft, you're talking about getting all the running backs first and then going after wide receivers later because there's going to be a lot of really good running backs next year. So yeah, it's been a good year to see these guys and to watch them come through as the season's gone along there. So yeah, I'll be watching and see what those top 5 are, and it'll be a good off season. And hopefully we'll be able to talk with you guys as the off season goes through, looking towards drafts and play that out as it goes. Thank you, A. Aladdin, for your chats. And again, appreciate you being on the stream. Oh, you say also have Jeff Wilson. Well, that does give you a backup plan for that earlier question. So keep that as a possible backup plan. But even so, I think me personally, like if I have to pick Josh Jacobs or taking a shot at Jeff Wilson, I'd rather have Jacobs if I'm confident in his health. So watch your reports. That's probably going to make your decision for you as it goes on. All right, let's move on to the next chat here. Let me make sure I don't miss anybody. I think if I miss anyone again, let me know. But I think the next one in line here is David Z. And David Z, it looks like you might be a new viewer to the stream, so welcome. You say PPR semifinals for me. Awesome. Is it too risky to try Jalen Hurts over Justin Herbert? My opponent is pretty good. Well, let's take a look at the matchups first. I have a gut on this one right away, but I want to put some information up because it's always better to talk about real stats than for me to just give my opinion with nothing else. Justin Herbert is a guy that you've trusted all year long. And I will say I'm in the same situation here with Herbert because, I've been playing him after picking him up partway through the year off the waiver wire. I've been playing him like kind of across the board in a bunch of leagues. Unfortunately, that means when he plays well, you've got a good shot to win them all. When he has bad games, it has a chance to hurt you. However, the matchup this week for the Chargers at Las Vegas, if you look on the left side of your screen, 10th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. So that's a good matchup. Jalen Hurts for Philadelphia playing at Arizona. Let's see, the matchup there is 20th. So just in the bottom half, that will be the 13th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. So if you go off the matchup, Justin Herbert has the edge there. Obviously, you've seen a couple of games where you would have liked for him to just have just a little bit more production to make you feel a little bit better about it. Does that mean that you take the shot here? I don't know. I have a feeling, I talked about this a little bit before, that when you're talking about Hurts starting his first game, it very easily could have been one of those situations where it's tough to defend a guy that you don't have any tape on. And New Orleans is too good of a defense to have been hit that hard by this team. I just feel like that was a weird outcome. Now they've got a game of tape on Hurts, and perhaps Arizona has a better game plan defensively against him. His running was what carried the day for him and not necessarily his passing. So if the Cardinals are able to keep him in the pocket and force him to pass a little bit more, who knows if we see the same results. I think that I guess the answer to your question is it would be a risk, in my opinion, to go that way when Justin Herbert has been as good as he's been. This is a pretty good matchup and a very reasonable bounce back spot for Herbert. I certainly, probably if it were me, I would probably stick with Herbert there, even though Hurts was good last week. That's what my gut tells me. It would be a risk. And what are these game times? Do the game times help you at all? No, it's a Thursday night game, so you pretty much got to make that choice ahead of time. I'm rolling with Herbert in my leagues. I hope that works out as well, but obviously there's been a couple of rougher games that makes you kind of think the other way. I just don't know if we've seen enough yet from Hurts. Like if he'd already had 2 games under his belt that were really good, then you might feel a little bit more comfortable for this one for your playoffs, but you're putting your league season on the line when Herbert's been as good as he's been the whole year. I feel that you might be better to be safe on this one than to take a shot. Of course, like you said, if your opponent is pretty good, take a look at your opponent's team and see if there are any players in common that make a difference there. Do they perhaps have a Keenan Allen or a Hunter Henry, somebody that's going to make the difference? Or do they have somebody on the Philadelphia side? Not that there's, a lot of, pass catchers on the Philadelphia side that have done much this year. I feel like, again, I talk about this quote that I saw earlier in the week, talking about that, your players that got you to the playoffs, they're going to be the same players that get you to week 16. So in one of these situations, you play your studs. And even though Herbert's had a couple of bad games, I think you still, if you look at his season overall, you would still be hard pressed to not say that he's been a stud for this entire year. So to me, again, like I always say, if you feel that you want to go the other way and you got to take that chance, I can't fault you, but I think Herbert is a good matchup and you've leaned on him to get here. You dance with the one that brung you and hopefully move on to that fantasy league championship. Again, David Z, I hope whichever guy you pick absolutely crushes it. And glad to have you on the stream. If you are new on the stream, make sure and click that subscribe button and so you can get those notifications whenever we have new content. And let me go ahead while I'm speaking about that. Let's put up, because I haven't done this for a while. So perhaps some of you have popped in since we put this information up earlier. We'll let you know about our TFF Live Sunday pregame show. And that is our main show. We do that every Sunday at 12 noon Eastern time. And we take you right up until game time. Same deal as this, answering all your fantasy football questions. A lot of other content as well, getting you ready for your matchups. So for those of you that haven't been on that show before, or if you're new tonight, glad to have you with us. Feel free to join us on Sunday. We'd love to have you to talk some more fantasy football. And then, of course, the rest of our information. We are a brand new channel on YouTube this year, so we appreciate all of you that have been with us. We are just about halfway. We had a goal of 100 new subscribers. We're just about halfway there. So we appreciate all of you that have played a part of getting those numbers going for us. But if you're new and you haven't subscribed yet, most importantly, want to make sure you get those notifications when we have new content. And also, we're on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can also send your fantasy football questions to our Twitter using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we answer those questions live on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook/Fantasy Follow, website fantasyfollow.com. All right, let's get right back to the chats. Again, we have plenty of more content for the rest of this show, talking about our waiver wire stuff, but we haven't done that yet, and we won't do that yet until we get through all of our chats, because this is most important. Carlos Orozco said, liked and subscribed. Have a good night. Thank you so much, Carlos Orozco. Glad to have you on the streams, and we would be super glad to see you on future streams as well. All right. And again, if I missed anybody, let me know that I've missed you. I'll jump back and get you, but it looks like the next in line is from Eric Flores, and Eric, looks like you are a new viewer, so welcome to the stream, Eric. And you say, what are your thoughts on Miles Sanders or Ayuk in a flex PPR? Oh, that's an interesting one here. Let's take a look at both sides of this. Starting with the Miles Sanders side, the matchup against Arizona. Arizona currently allowing where are they on the list? We just talked about them. 17th, so right in the middle in terms of fantasy points to the running back spot. We flip that over to the wide receiver side, and San Francisco. They are on the road at Dallas. Dallas allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. This is what I think. I know Miles Sanders had a great game, but the other factors that are in play here probably make this decision. And that is the fact that it's a flex. The fact that it's a PPR. Certainly Ayuk is the wide receiver. You've got the chance for a little bit extra there. And also, no Deebo Samuel. Let me just make sure I'm not misspeaking and saying that, but I'm pretty sure I did see a report that said that they thought Deebo Samuel was done for the year, I think, at this point. That certainly means that Brandon Ayuk has been great, even with Deebo in the lineup. But without him, certainly even more opportunity for Ayuk to have a lot of production. I see Samuel is listed as yes, he's out. He's already listed as out. And Kyle Shanahan said Deebo Samuel will be out a while. An ESPN report also said he could miss the rest of the season. So, yeah, to me, like, this is a top matchup against Dallas. Dallas has been bleeding points to wide receivers. And let's take a look at what Ayuk did. I'm pretty sure he had a ton of targets last week again, if I'm not mistaken. 16 targets against Washington. And Washington is a tougher defensive team as well. 10 catches, 119 yards. Yeah, I think despite the fact that Sanders had that big of a game, it's kind of hard to argue with 16 targets. And then your other main receiver is not there this week for your team against a matchup like Dallas. I think all signs in that one do point to Brandon Ayuk. It's a top matchup. You have to expect that he's in a good line to have a nice potential game there. So yeah, if I had to pick there, I think I like Ayuk, especially given the fact that it's PPR. Of course, Sanders did have a great game, so he has some potential too. But to me, I think Brandon Ayuk is a fine start. Again, Eric Flores, whichever guy you pick there, I hope that they crush it. And also glad to have you on the stream and look forward to having you on future streams as well. All right, let me see here. Let me check at any of these follow-ups, and let me try to make sure I'm going in order. I do see a new one from David Z, but I see Trey S is here before him, so I'm going to go ahead and get Trey S onto the screen. And Trey S says, evening, mate. Glad to have you with us, Trey. I don't know if you're new to the stream or not, but if you are, welcome. You say full PPR, bench 1, Deontay Johnson, Robert Woods, or DeAndre Swift. Thanks. Ooh, this is an interesting one. Bench 1. So you're picking 2 out of these 3. All right, let's take a look. Starting with the wide receiver, because that's who you mentioned first, and this is Deontay Johnson for Pittsburgh. That is the Monday night game at Cincinnati. And as soon as I get my other screen doing what I want it to, Cincinnati, if you look on the left side of your screen, the 17th spot in terms of fantasy points to wide receivers. Deontay Johnson had a little bit of a case of the drops this last game. Not sure what happened there. But again, that's the Monday night game. Then you got Robert Woods for the Rams. They are 405 on Sunday, playing at home against the Jets. The Jets are 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. My gut says don't sit Robert Woods against the Jets. The Jets have been just leaking to wide receivers lately. And then DeAndre Swift certainly had a very nice game this past week. And their matchup on the road against Tennessee, where does this Tennessee fall? The 6th most – I'm sorry, he's not a wide receiver. Let's get up the running backs. Tennessee, the 7th most fantasy points to the running back spot. I think that you were potentially somewhat concerned this last week with Swift being on a little bit of a snap count, and it does look like he did still have a very nice game. I do want to see what they say about his usage, so I'm calling up this report as we speak here. Let's see. It says he was on the lead side of the Lions committee backfield, so he did have 7 rushes, 24 yards, 4 of 5 targets, 26 yards, and I believe he did have a touchdown in that game, yes. So in a half-point PPR that I'm looking at, it was 13.0. If it's full PPR, you would add an extra 2. That would have been 15 points. You would think that they would have less concern with his workload now that he has had a game under his belt from being gone for a little bit. The only difference here is that this is full PPR, and that does tell you that Deontay has some potential there as well. I think Robert Woods is my first guy to pick here. I think if you're benching one, it's between Deontay and DeAndre. Pick a name that's close to each other. I don't dislike Swift. I do want to take a look at Johnson's stats just to compare it. Let's see. Deontay Johnson. Let's just call it. All right, I'll figure this out. Sometimes the computer doesn't cooperate. There he is, Deontay Johnson. In terms of targets this last game, he had 7 targets, 4 catches. That was 40 yards, 6 points in a half-point screen, and it would have been 8 in a full PPR. So not a great game. He's actually been under 10 in a half-point 2 out of the last 3 games. He would have been just over 10 in week 12. And in week 13, he had 17.1. I think that there are a lot of mouths to feed in Pittsburgh. So in any given week, it could go Johnson's way or it could go to somebody else. On Swift's side of things, you would expect him to be a little bit more of the workload. The only thing that makes me hesitant to say Swift as my second guy here is the fact that it's full point PPR. So I think it makes those two guys close. I think Woods has the edge between all of them. So I would say Woods is in. And then I think you're picking between the other two. And I would say probably for all the information I can give you, this might be a gut decision for you on if you want to go with Johnson because of the PPR, or if you trust Swift, who has been pretty good and a pretty good matchup that Detroit has against Tennessee. I think the matchup edge is there for that Swift side of it. Again, the Pittsburgh side, Cincinnati is not an awful matchup. They're at 17th, but they're certainly not in the green. And Tennessee is up there in the 7th. So I do like that matchup. I think that as I'm talking that through, I think to me it probably says Woods and Swift, but I do think it's close between Johnson and Swift in terms of who you sit. So hopefully that information helps you out. I think Woods and Swift are fine starts there, but whichever guys you do pick, I do hope that they crush it. And thank you again, Trey S. And if you are new to the stream, glad to have you with us. And Colton says bench Deontay. And so, yep, Colton was thinking kind of the same way as I was thinking there. So again, I hope whoever you pick there, and you say appreciate it, Colton. Hope whoever you pick crushes it, and get you making your way on towards your fantasy championships. All right, let me see who's next here. I'm not sure if I got this one from David Z. I don't think I did. Also, I'm torn with my running back situation because I have Aaron Jones and Miles Sanders. They've been so inconsistent. I agree. I also have Cam Akers. Ooh, so pick one full PPR with three guys that could do anything. We've talked about this a little bit tonight already. You're in your playoffs. Are you swinging for the fences this week? If you are, Cam Akers had a great game last week and has a great matchup at home against the Jets. They are allowing the 12th most fantasy points to the running back spot. I don't necessarily feel like the Jets are as easy to run against as some may think that they are, but they still are giving up the points. In my opinion, Aaron Jones is the guy that you drafted high, and this is kind of what we've talked about a lot on this show. A quote that I read earlier this week is that the guys that got you to your playoffs are the guys that are going to get you to week 16 for your championship. It's kind of that dance with the girl that brung you type situation, and that's Aaron Jones here, even though he's been a little bit more inconsistent. The matchup, home game against Carolina. Carolina, the 8th most fantasy points to the running back spot, so it's a good matchup. Sanders in the remainder of this discussion on the road at Arizona, 17th in terms of fantasy points, so a midway matchup. And also, I think between Jones and Sanders, I would say Sanders has been less consistent than Jones has. Again, I don't have Jones's numbers in front of me right now, so perhaps I'll do that really quick just to make sure that I'm not losing my mind. I do think that because he is, to me, I like to talk about those four factors when making these decisions: ability, volume, matchup, and game script. Ability-wise, I think Aaron Jones is the top-tier player out of these guys that you mentioned. Volume-wise, I know Jamal Williams is there, but you expect Jones to be the main guy. And again, matchup-wise, it's a really good matchup against Carolina. Perhaps actually it's actually the best out of all the matchups of the players that you've listed. So if you take all those things into consideration, like those all point to Aaron Jones. And yes, he's been a little bit inconsistent. But when you get those guys that have been your main guys all year long, you drafted them high for a reason, and that's to bring you home a championship. And this is his opportunity to do that for you. So to me, I'm probably picking Aaron Jones in this situation. I won't say that, again, if you're swinging for the fences, that Cam Akers name might loom large because he had such a big game this last game. But you know that Aaron Jones has the potential to put up big games too. And with Akers, there's always a chance Darrell Henderson or Malcolm Brown gets a hot hand and he doesn't see as much work. And with Sanders, I know he's had a great game last week, but it's just been weird that they haven't been using him all year like that. I've been saying for a while that they needed to, so perhaps they're getting back to that. But to me, all signs here point to Aaron Jones. Is that a lock that it's going to work out? No, I mean, it never is. It's fantasy football. But when you look at all those factors, like I said, you drafted this guy because this is, to start the year, you're like, all right, if I get Aaron Jones here, this is a guy that could take me where I want to go. This is his chance to do it. I think you lean on him. But again, David Z, I hope whichever guy you pick there, I hope that they crush it. But I think that Aaron Jones, a fine start in that situation. All right, let me see what is next here in line. I do see from Chris Genova. I'm not sure if I popped this one on the screen yet. Awesome. Thanks a lot for the advice, man. I say no. Thank you, Chris, for being with us on the stream. Best of luck in your leagues. I think the next one I have here is from Vansco. Says, I'm still alive. Welcome back, Vansco. Glad to have you here with us again. I'm still alive in all 5 of my leagues. Awesome. That is a great record to be alive in 5 leagues at this point. But I'm not feeling confident about my matchups. Well, you know what? That doesn't mean you can't get it done. Let me see if there is a follow-up here. Yes, you say, I'm worried about Tomlin benching Deontay Johnson again. Yes, because of the drops. That's the only reason he's on my bench right now. I can't disagree with that concern, and I will also say this without looking at exactly who the other players are. When you look at that matchup, it is only a middling matchup against Cincinnati. Monday night game, 17th in terms of fantasy points to wide receivers. Is that because Cincinnati's defense is great? I'd probably not say that, but I would think it's more along the lines of the fact that Cincinnati hasn't had the lead in a lot of games. So you've seen teams not necessarily have to be throwing the ball as much against them. Pittsburgh, that might not be as much of a factor because it seems like they just don't want to run the ball. I can't understand why, although I will say that James Conner does look to be a little banged up at this point. So I don't disagree with this benching of Deontay Johnson if you have other players who are of equal level in terms of what they can do for you this week. I would probably feel the same, and I actually do have Deontay Johnson in I think at least one of my leagues, and I've been kind of in the same spot with that thinking with keeping him on the bench right now. So I don't disagree with that thought at all for you, Vansco. But 5 leagues that you're still in, like, man, that's awesome. I hope you win all 5 of them. That would be just tremendous. How many leagues do you play in, Vansco? Let me know. I'd be interested to know. If it's a 5 for 5, even better, man. That is some great playing throughout this year. Thank you for being on the stream again. Glad to have you back. Again, glad that Kyle Rudolph situation didn't impact you too badly in that one over the Gesicki pick. All right. Thank you, Vansco, for being on the chat. Let me go to the next one here in line. And I think Chip Douglas is next. Thanks for being with us, Chip. Glad to have you on the chat. Looks like you're a new viewer as well. So glad to have you on the stream and would love to have you on as one of our regulars along with the rest of these guys. Appreciate all you guys that are in the chat with us. You say pick 3, PPR, James Robinson, Austin Eckler, Mike Davis, Cam Akers. All right, let's put up some information talking about running backs here. A lot of good names. James Robinson has had a great year. This is not a great matchup on the road at Baltimore. The numbers, Baltimore is 15th in terms of fantasy points to the running back spot. That number is, they have gone up that list because of this game Monday night. And Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt both crushed it against them. So they were lower on this list before that. So that's a little bit of that number is a little bit skewed in my opinion because Cleveland is a great running team. I'm thinking that perhaps this matchup is not as great for Jacksonville. Not that Robinson hasn't been good all year, but I hesitate to think that Jacksonville is winning that game against Baltimore, and they potentially have to throw the ball a little bit more. I don't think that takes Robinson out of play, but just some things to think about here. Austin Eckler in the Thursday night game. Let's see, that's a road game at Las Vegas. Las Vegas, the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back spot. I think that's a great matchup. Keep an eye on Austin Eckler because I will put up, let's see here. Let me get this on the screen here if it helps out in here. This is what we were seeing today in terms of our headlines as both Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler were limited in practice. It doesn't look to be anything, being that it's a short week. I think they were just being cautious and they're both expected to play. But do keep an eye on that in case there's anything funny going on. You certainly don't want to be in that situation. But if there isn't, a great matchup for Austin Eckler. I think you'd be hard-pressed not to make him one of the guys you pick out of this list. Mike Davis, great matchup on the road at Green Bay. That is 8:15 Saturday night. Green Bay allowing the 4th, as you see on the left side of your screen, 4th most fantasy points to the running back spot. Again, I will play this clip for those of you who did not get a chance to see it yet. From Matt Rule talking about Christian McCaffrey's chances to play this week. You all may know this information, but those of you that don't might want to get this. So here's Matt Rule earlier today.
I'm not expecting him to play as of right now. We'll see how the next couple of days unfold. Obviously, today was a walkthrough, so he was able to do some things, but I'm not expecting him to play as we sit here right now.
All right, so that's the situation there. That's probably common knowledge, but I do like to play those clips just because those of you might not have that information out there yet. I think that makes Mike Davis a great start and a great matchup. He certainly had a great game this last week, and he has had a lot of other good games this year, although he did have a couple of down weeks. I've been pretty high on Mike Davis the whole year through, so I think he's a fine pick here. Cam Akers, this is another nice matchup against the Jets. This is a 4:00 game at home on Sunday, and the Jets, they are number 12 on the left side of your screen in terms of fantasy points to the running back spot. I think that there are, the usual question marks that we have with the Rams backfield is, you've still got Malcolm Brown, Darrell Henderson potentially in the mix there. And if one of them should get hot, does that mean less work for Cam? Even though he had a great game last week, that's always a possibility. So to me, if you're picking three here, I think Eckler and Davis are a step ahead of these other guys. I think those are two of your picks for sure, based on their matchups, based on what they've done all year and their volume. I think all of that is in line for those guys. I do think that there's the other two is, to me, a little bit of a coin flip, because Robinson, you expect to get all the volume there. So that makes it a safer pick in terms of, I know it's not as good of a matchup, but again, I always talk about these four factors: ability, volume, matchup, and game script. And the order is important there, because often you're going to take volume over matchup. So even though the matchup is not as good, the Akers matchup is better, but the volume gives you a safer floor for Robinson. And if he overcomes the matchup, then that's a nice game for you. There is always that potential with Akers that he doesn't see as much work. Now, certainly he did see the work the last game. Does that continue? You hope for that. I think he has the potential for the bigger game. So perhaps your decision comes down to what do you feel about your matchup at that point? Are these both late games? Probably not. Jacksonville is a 1 p.m. game, so you kind of have to make that decision ahead of time. But if you feel like you're in a situation where your opponent is great, this is your playoffs, and this guy you're playing has been crushing it all year long and is projected to win, then Cam Akers might be the swing for the fences pick, because the potential is there for a bigger game. Because of the matchup. At the same time, if it's the opposite of that, if you are projected to win, or if the other team you're playing doesn't have, perhaps they got a couple of injuries or whatever the case may be, then James Robinson might be a safer play for his floor, but potentially doesn't have as much upside because the matchup isn't as good. So that's probably what your decision is going to come down to. And again, your roster and your lineup as well as anybody. So I would say Eckler, Davis, I think are fine starts. And I think the choice between those other two comes down to, do you need the floor, or do you need the potential big game that could end up in a worse game if he doesn't get as much volume? I think that's where your decision lies. I hope that information helps. Again, I know I didn't give you an exact name there. If it were me personally, I actually don't know who I would pick with that. I don't. That might be like a fantasy game time decision, because Robinson's been really good, and also Akers had the great game. So I think you really truly can go either way on those two. So I will say Eckler, Davis, fine starts. Akers, Robinson, go with your gut between those two and base that on where you're at in your matchup. And again, as I always say, I hope whichever guys you pick, I hope they absolutely crush it. And Chip Douglas, welcome to the stream. Glad to have you on tonight, and glad that you were able to drop in the chat and talk some fantasy football with us. All right, let's see what's next in line here. It looks like from Marco Rodriguez. And Marco, you say, who are your top three streams for quarterback this week? Currently have Matt Ryan versus Tampa Bay. I have to stream quarterback every week since I lost Dak earlier this season. Let's take a look and see what we can come up with here. I will put up the points to quarterbacks, and I will try to run through potentials that I think are in play here for you. If Tom Brady is a streamer in your league, then he's probably not. But if for some reason he were, he might be in play. But I will say that on terms of, let me put this information up here. Let's do this. The content that I have prepared for this show that we haven't done yet is the waiver wire for week 15. And I do have, as one of my bonus waiver wire ads this week, Derek Carr, actually, who's been like a guy that we've talked about a little bit this season as a potential streamer. He has been up and down, but he has, in the last two games, averaged 29.29 fantasy points. He's had 5 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. If I do put up his matchup here on the left side of your screen, they are playing Thursday night game home against the Chargers. The Chargers are, where are they on your list here? Fantasy points to quarterbacks. 9th most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. It's last week Carr had 2 touchdowns, 316 yards, also a touchdown on the ground. It was 25.84 fantasy points. He has seemed to have a couple of better games recently. Potentially, is he a guy that might fit that mold in terms of a streamer this week? I think that's a possibility. Let me see who else we've got on the list here that might be in line for a potential streamer situation. Just looking through the top matchups to see who I can pick out. Let's see, Seattle game, Washington, Tennessee game. In terms of your top matchups, Detroit, no Stafford playing there, most likely. Cleveland, where's the Cleveland game at? Playing against the Giants, not necessarily unless you want to go with Daniel Jones. Detroit, Tennessee, can't do it there unless Tannehill's available. I'm guessing not available. The Buffalo game, no, against Denver unless you really like what Drew Lock did. And then you come to Derek Carr in that Chargers game. I don't think that's a bad choice necessarily. The one that you've got in there is Matt Ryan, and that is a 1 p.m. Sunday game. Tampa Bay, looking at the list, currently allowing the 14th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. So in terms of matchup, there are not that many guys really that you probably trust that have better matchups than Matt Ryan. And that is the trust in Matt Ryan is a whole nother ball of wax. But Phillip Rivers potentially has been a little bit better playing at home against Houston. Houston has been pretty much giving up a lot of passing yards recently. So that's another name that you could think about. I don't know if I trust him more than Matt Ryan. It might be a little bit of a wash. Dallas game, no. Carolina game, Green Bay, nothing to do there. Baltimore, Denver, nothing you can really do there. Jacksonville, you're not going to stream Gardner Minshew over Matt Ryan, I don't think. So that's the top half of your matchups. I think Matt Ryan is a reasonable choice. I don't know who is better unless you really like taking a chance on Derek Carr there in that game. Again, possibly Phillip Rivers, but if you're asking for top three, I don't think that it's out of the realm of possibility to say that Ryan, Rivers, and Carr could be your top three. You may be in the best situation that you can have with that spot for Matt Ryan. Again, if Julio Jones plays, that makes a difference. If Julio doesn't play, then perhaps you look otherwise. And Carr has had a couple good weeks, some potential there if you want to take a chance on him. So again, Marco, appreciate the chat. I hope that helps you out. And whoever you go with there, I do hope, as always, that they crush it. All right. Eric Flores says, I lost Debo. I appreciate the advice. I'm scrolling back up to remember. What your question was about Sanders or Ayuk. So, yeah, absolutely, Eric. Again, not a problem at all. I'm glad to have you on the stream. And I really, with all of these, I really do want all these matchups to work out well for all you guys. All right. Next up in line here is Munir N. Welcome back, Munir N, to the stream. And you say Chris Godwin, Wayne Gallman, Zeke, T.Y. Hilton, or Kenyon Drake as flex PPR. All right, let me see. Let's put up some information to help us out with this decision. Chris Godwin, we will start with Tampa Bay at Atlanta, the second most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Here's the deal. Last week was a great matchup for Chris Godwin, and they kind of mixed it up, and he really didn't get a bulk load of the work. So this is always a problem right now because it does seem with Tampa Bay that Tom Brady is, let's put it this way, is no Jameis Winston. When you had those games where Jameis Winston would just lock in on one receiver and that's the only person he'd throw to no matter what, you're not getting that this year. Last week against Minnesota, Godwin, 3 targets, 2 catches, 25 yards, 3.5 in a half-point PPR, so that would have been 4.5 in a full PPR. Kind of hard to trust that on a week-in and week-out situation at this point. Let me see. Let's take a look at your other wide receiver there is T.Y. Hilton. T.Y., obviously, another great game this past week. Couple of touchdowns there. I think he's had 4 now in the last 3 games. Let me see if I'm right on that. Yes, 4 in the last 3 games, and he has had, 277 yards over that stretch. He had 7 targets, 5 catches, 86 yards. That was 23.10 fantasy points. You did say it was a full PPR, I believe. Let me just double check that. Yes. So in a PPR format, that would have been 25.6 fantasy points. Kind of hard to argue with that production. He's on a roll. And Houston, on the left side of your screen, the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. They've been very vulnerable through the air. I probably would trust, even though I know the beginning of this year, T.Y. was like, where's T.Y. Hilton? Well, he's back. He's played great. I might trust him over Godwin. So if I'm going to pick a wide receiver here, it might be that person. However, you do have some running backs to consider here as well. So let's go ahead and look at these, starting with Wayne Gallman. for the New York Football Giants, playing at home versus Cleveland. Gallman's game not as great this last week. Had 12 attempts, 57 yards. Saw he lost the goal line touch to Dion Lewis. I think that was this last game, which was baffling. But this game playing against Cleveland, if you look on the left side of your screen, let's see where they fall. 22nd. So in the bottom half in terms of fantasy points to the running back position. So Gallman is kind of just an choice. I think at that point you do expect him to get the volume there. So that does help you, at least knowing that you're going to get that volume, but remains to be seen what the production looks like. Kind of the same situation with Zeke. They are playing at home against San Francisco, 5th fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. We know what Zeke's struggles have been this year. Normally you would think this is a no-brainer that he might be the guy that you pick here, but this is not a great matchup. And he's been struggling. So perhaps you can't trust him in this spot, even though you would want to. He just hasn't been there. Kenyon Drake is not a guy that I've been high on all year, but he does seem to have been playing a little bit better recently. Let's take a look at this last week. 23 carries, one of his highest totals of the year. I think that might actually be his highest total of the year. 80 yards, had a touchdown, 15.50 points in a half-point PPR format. It says he did fumble twice in the span of 3 plays last week. I can't say that I watched a lot of that game, but he does seem to be – he's had a bunch of good games in a row. So although in the beginning of the year I didn't feel you could really trust him all that much, it is better than it's been. And the matchup this week is at home against Philadelphia. And so Philadelphia on the left side of your screen, 23rd. Not great in terms of the numbers. To me, like this is probably – T.Y.'s been hot and Drake has been better. And the other guys, there's been some question marks. Gallman has been very consistent, didn't have as big of a game. Zeke has struggled, and Godwin last week was a down week. Who knows if that is a bounce back this week or not. My gut says it's between T.Y. and Drake for these two. And for the fact that you said it is a PPR league, I feel like it's a reasonable decision to look towards the wide receiver for this choice. So I think, even though T.Y. has been struggling like the first half of the year, he has had a much nicer second half. And again, Houston has been bleeding to the pass game, 9th in terms of fantasy points to the wide receivers. I feel like there's a reasonable chance for T.Y. to continue this stretch. So again, as I always say with these, I love to talk these through and present a whole bunch of different information because regardless of what my opinion is, something that I said information-wise might point you to the way that you want to go. To me, I think T.Y. Hilton is a fine start here. It's always tough picking 1 out of 5 because there certainly are a lot of other opportunities there. But T.Y.'s been hot. He's had a couple of good games in a row there. I think that's a fine start. And but again, I think whoever you do pick, Money or N, I hope that they do crush it for you. I want you to get those wins and move along in your fantasy playoffs. So absolutely good luck to you, Munir N, and hope that your guy crushes it. Chat here from Vansco says, I'm going to go with Devontae, Lockett, and Cup. Looking back up earlier to your questions just to see, I know that you said you were a little bit hesitant with some of your players. I'm not sure if I even still have that chat or if it's disappeared. They do once in a while. They disappear when we get a lot of them. But I do know that you were thinking with that. Devontae Adams, I don't know how you can here they are. I don't see how you can ever go wrong with Devontae Adams. Tyler Lockett has been a little bit of a question mark, of course. Hasn't been great, but you have to think at some point he's going to have a nice game. Cooper Kupp against the Jets. Let's see. This seems to be a good matchup. Let's see what the Jets there. Yeah, they were giving up a lot of points to the wide receivers. 7th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So it seems like a good spot for Kupp there, and you can never go wrong with Devontae. And certainly if that means that Lockett is your guy, that's like your boomer bust guy, because you've got a couple other guys that are solid already and you're hoping for a big game there. I think that's very reasonable game plan. Absolutely hope that works out for you there. All right, Vansco, thank you for the chat. David Z says, thank you so much for the advice. I don't remember if I put that up yet or not, but if I didn't, absolutely thank you for being on the stream. Vansco, 5 for 5, 2 second seeds, 2 3 seeds, and a 4th seed. Hashtag blessed. That is a great season of fantasy football. You got to be loving it right now. If you play in 5 leagues and you're in all 5 of your playoffs, then you got that Sunday ticket on this weekend and you are just yelling and screaming at every game, flipping back and forth, red zone, whatever the case may be. That is a great spot to be in. We all wish that we were in that spot. Yeah, that is awesome, Vansco. I hope you continue crushing it. It's going to be a great weekend for you, I hope. Go out there and get those W's, get those championships. And let me see here. I'm going to hit this follow-up here before I jump to the next one. As a serious Rams fan, who is starting Cam Akers in the one league that I have him? Oh, you are saying. I will say that he's liable to get his touchdown stolen. Yes, I agree with that. Goff, Hendo, Brown, or receiver. McVay is tricky like that. Yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking all along with that. In some of these decisions, you have to take that into consideration. You also do have to take into consideration that he just had a huge game. So perhaps he gets the first shot at a hot hand, but that doesn't necessarily always mean that it ends up being him that gets it. So yeah, that does make a difference. But absolutely, as someone who's a Rams fan, you can always attest to what's going on with your team, as well or better than anybody else, because you're seeing it up close and really paying close attention to it. So I definitely agree with that sentiment, and that certainly has to come into play for making those sorts of decisions. I'm gonna clean up these Vansco's yours, and I'm gonna jump over to the next one after that. In one league, I drafted Julio, Godwin, Juju, and Chark. Juju has been my best receiver in that league. Talk about sadness. Well, you're still 5 for 5, but yeah, that's you started the year thinking, wow, you're in great shape, and all of a sudden just, but that happens. And CD, who was money until Dak went down, yeah. So that's over Deontay. You said, yeah, that is I think over Deontay. I think you're referring to the other guys that you're starting, but. Yeah, that's the deal with like when you're drafting in the beginning of the year, like you have your guys that you expect to be your main core players, and you have to kind of hope that they work out. But that's why a lot of people will say that, you don't win your fantasy league in a draft. You win it based on what you do throughout the year off the waiver wire, making trades and whatnot. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that you can do. And sometimes you have to work harder than others. Sometimes you get those great years where you just coast through. Doesn't always happen that way. So, yeah, you've done a great job to be 5 for 5 at that point. All right, thank you again, Vansco. Let me move on to the next tier. If I miss anybody, please let me know, but I think that AB Goldberger is next. And AB, you say pick 2 running backs, Taylor, Mostert, Gurley, McKissick, Gallman, and would you start any at flex over Deontay? Or I believe by TY you mean T.Y. Hilton, who was my WR3 for now. All right, to help out with this, we will put up the information on the left side of the screen in terms of the running back matchups. And give me a second here because I got to back out on my other screen to get over to my matchups. I checked on a lot of players since the last time I talked about this, so I am way into that information from where I was. I will say my first gut is, just by what you say there, is that it's hard to go against Jonathan Taylor at this point. That is my first gut without even looking at the matchups. I'm pretty sure that they are playing Houston this week. I think one more click and I'm back to that screen. Yes, I am. So Indianapolis is home against Houston, 1 o'clock on Sunday. Fantasy points to the running back spot. Houston, the second most fantasy points in the league to the running back position. After that big game from Jonathan Taylor, that tells me that he is a great player to look to again this week. So I don't think you can go wrong there. I mean, obviously you never know ever what's going to happen, so I shouldn't say it that way that you can't go wrong, but I think it's a fine start. Raheem Mostert, there are potentially some injury issues there. He did go in for an MRI yesterday. Keep an eye on your reports. Not sure what's going to happen with him if he potentially doesn't play, or if he does play. If he weren't at 100%, then you're possibly looking at more Shanahanigans there, and never know what's going to happen with that backfield. Todd Gurley last week, I did not look up what happened to Todd Gurley, but perhaps one of you guys in the chat can let me know if you do know. Did Todd Gurley survive that game? Or did he leave that game with an injury? Because I expected him to have a better game than he did, and he didn't. And so I haven't looked up to see what happened there, but I'm going to look up right now. He's not listed as questionable. Let's see. 6 carries for 19 yards, 2 of 3 targets. Like, it says he had 5 straight touches on the opening drive, and only had 3 after that. Of course, it says they abandoned the run despite leading most of the game. That's a weird one. Ito Smith had 12 touches. Brian Hill had 2 touches. What's up with Todd Gurley? Had some injury concerns, supposedly was healthy, but that's not a normal game there for Todd Gurley. Am I concerned with that? Yeah. If I'm thinking about starting him, that concerns me. So I don't know that Gurley is the potential for that pick. J.D. McKissick for the Washington football team. My other screen catches up to me. Washington, I believe they are playing at home. Yes, against Seattle. So look at your left side of your screen, 11th in terms of fantasy points to running backs. Again, McKissick is your pass catcher. Not sure what's going to happen there with Alex Smith. It looks like he is expected to play, but were that to change, that would definitely make a difference. Wayne Gallman has been pretty solid, didn't have as great of a game, but they are home against Cleveland, and Cleveland on your list is 22nd, so they are in the bottom half. And would I start any at flex over Deontay Johnson? Well, let's do this. Let's pick 2 running backs. Taylor is for sure one of your 2. There's question marks across the board for the rest of them. McKissick, I think you've got to keep an eye on reports to see if Antonio Gibson plays. If Gibson does not play, then potentially that puts J.D. McKissick in play. I'm going to see what he did last week, because I'm not sure exactly what kind of volume he saw. I do think he saw more rushing volume than I expected. 11 rushes, 68 yards, 9.6 points in a PPR format. It says that he split carries with Peyton Barber. That surprised me. I thought Barber would get a little bit more. Didn't have a lot of the work as far as a pass catcher last week for some reason. But I think that he is definitely in play as a possibility there. Is the matchup just as good? Seattle, 11th. That's not a bad matchup. If they do end up falling behind, he certainly will get the work in terms of the screenplays. If they have to turn him more into a pass catcher, I would probably put Gallman ahead of him most weeks. But Gallman's matchup against Cleveland is in terms of the stats a tougher matchup. So I might lean McKissick there. Although Gallman, you expect to get all the volume. I think it's close between those 2. I probably have to say those are the next 2 that I would pick between after Taylor. I'm concerned about Mostert's injury, and I'm concerned why Gurley got so little work last week. That baffles me. So is there something going on there that we don't know about? So Taylor first, McKissick and Gallman, choice between the 2 of those for second. My gut says between McKissick and Gallman that Deontay gets the nod at flex still in between those 2. For Pittsburgh, playing against Cincinnati. Cincinnati is not like a team that you're super worried about in terms of their defense. I got to think there's a potential for a bounce back. Does Deontay put up another stinker? Of course, it's possible. But Gallman's a tough matchup. Has the volume, but a tough matchup. McKissick a little bit better matchup. Necessarily doesn't have the volume. Pittsburgh's going to throw the ball over the place. I don't know if you told me if this is a PPR league or not. I think if it's a PPR, that it probably definitely puts the nod there, or at least makes it a stronger thought for Deontay. But I don't know if I feel strong enough about either McKissick or Gallman or Mostert or Gurley to start over Deontay. So I think what I'm saying is Taylor for sure, and then coin flip McKissick and Gallman. Gallman's been really good all year long. He's probably been more consistent. It's probably the more consistent start, but the tougher matchup, and McKissick is a possibility there. If Gibson plays, I think it's definitely Gallman. Let's put it that way. If Gibson doesn't play, then I think McKissick and Gallman could be potentially a coin flip for you. I definitely would put Taylor first, and I do think, again, in my opinion, like I always say, you know your teams as well as anybody. I'm feeling like Deontay is still reasonable to start over those other guys. But as I always say, I hope whichever guys you choose, I do hope they absolutely crush it. And AB Goldberger, thank you for the chat. I'm scrolling down to see if there's any follow-ups from you, and I don't think so. So again, hope those work out for you, and hopefully that will allow you to absolutely crush it. All right, from Marco Rodriguez, the other guy has Tom. I'm scrolling back up to see about, you were talking about the streamers, and you were looking for, you're already going up against Tom Brady. So yeah, that's kind of rough seeing that he has a good matchup there. You said, thank you for the advice, Joe. Have a good night, man. Subscribed 2 weeks ago. Like the video. I'll be tuning in. Awesome. Glad to have you with him, Marco Rodriguez. All you guys that have been with us through the season and that have subscribed to the channel as we continue to grow. Obviously as a new channel, that's tremendous for us. And we continue to like having you guys on all these streams. So absolutely glad to have you. And thank you for letting us know about that. And you say, I agree with your take on the Julio thing. I hope Julio plays, because I have Julio on a team that's in the playoffs this week. And I would love to be able to play him this week. It certainly would make a big difference. I hope he's healthy. I'm almost glad that they sat him out last week and hoping that it would make him healthier for this week, because in that particular league where I had him, I wasn't in danger last week. So it's one of those leagues where it's a 10-team league, 4 teams in the playoffs start this week. So I'm hoping Julio gets back there and is back in it this week so that we can have a nice game from him for not just for me, but for whoever has Julio. All right. Again, if I miss anybody, let me know. But I think next up in line here is Neem Lucier. Tell me if I said that right. Neem Lucier. It looks like you might be a new viewer to the stream. Glad to have you with us. Welcome. You say standard 1 QB. Do I flex Ayuk, Evans, Thielen, or Rojo if he's all good to go? Well, let's take a look at some numbers. We got a couple of receivers here and a running back. So let's start with the wide receivers, and we'll take a look at their matchups, talk our way through this. Brandon Ayuk, I think, is a great play with no Deebo Samuel. They're playing on the road at Dallas, 1 o'clock Sunday. Dallas, the 5th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. I think we said earlier, 16 targets this past week. I think Brandon Ayuk is a very solid thought to play in this situation. Mike Evans for Tampa Bay on the road at Atlanta, also a 1 o'clock game. Atlanta, the 2nd most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. The matchup is there. However, I will say this. There are so many mouths to feed. Like last week, we talked about Chris Godwin playing the Vikings. And the Vikings, obviously, you see them on your list about how high they were up. And, we didn't necessarily see big production. I liked Mike Evans a lot last week. I think he just had a middling day. Don't quote me because I don't have his stats up in front of me. But I don't know that he had – I want to actually look now. I don't know that he had the huge day. I actually expected out of all the guys last week for Tampa Bay, I thought Evans was going to be the guy to beat last week in terms of having a big game there. And I don't know that he actually did. Let me take a look. Let's see. Mike Evans last week, just 5 targets, 3 catches, 56 yards. That drives you crazy if you got Mike Evans on your team. 7.10 fantasy points in a full PPR. That would have been 8.6. In a standard, that would have been 5.6. Come on, Tampa. Let's go here. Mike Evans is your best player. I mean, really, you got to get this guy the ball. Come on. Nonetheless, does that mean that you have to put him above a guy like Ayuk this week with that type of volume that he got? I don't know. Rojo, I don't know. Again, we'll put up the let's put this up here real quick. Let's take this down, Neem, and I will put up the update about Ronald Jones. And here it is. For those of you that don't know the information yet, Ronald Jones surgery to repair a broken finger. He's having a procedure to put a pin in there, the same procedure that Chris Godwin had. And that what they've noted so far is that Godwin did miss 1 game when undergoing this procedure. So to me, it seems very reasonable that Jones misses 1 game as well. I think that's probably going to make that decision for you a little bit easier, kind of takes him out of play. So let me put up your original comment again. To me, the volume, you can't argue with Ayuk. He's been really good all year long. There are so many mouths to feed. Oh, I missed Adam Thielen. Let's go to Adam Thielen. Minnesota at home against Chicago. Tough matchup. Chicago, the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. So, yeah, Mike Evans and Adam Thielen are 2 big names, to be thinking about playing Brandon Ayuk over here. But, again, in your playoffs, potentially, are you looking at needing a big week here? And which one of these players do you think has the best chance for a big week? You got a guy that had 16 targets, 10 catches last week. And that's Brandon Ayuk. And no Deebo Samuel. So the expectation is, what reasons do you have there to think that he wouldn't potentially be in line for another similar workload? To me, I think of all those guys, you probably feel, again, you want to be able to trust your main guys at this time of the year. Chicago's a tough matchup for Thielen, although Thielen had a great game against Chicago the last game. I will say that. So he potentially could have another great game. Evans, I think there's too many mouths to feed to start him over Ayuk or Thielen. To me, it's between, as I talk this through, it's between Ayuk and Thielen. And I think it's going to come down to, do you want to trust your stud, the guy that you drafted high at the beginning of the year, or do you want to go with a rookie who's been seeing an extreme amount of volume? And again, the matchup there for San Francisco at Dallas, that's a great matchup. So again, tough to go against Thielen because he had such a big game against Chicago, but it's also tough to think that somebody playing Dallas, seeing the volume that he's seeing, couldn't potentially have a really great game. I like Ayuk there. It's hard for me to tell you to sit one of those main guys. So I'm going to say, take the information that I've given you and use that to help you make that decision. But to me, Ayuk is a fine start, but I can't fault you if you decide to go another direction and go Thielen there. And again, I hope whichever you pick, I hope they actually crush it. But I do think Ayuk is a fine start if you decided to go that route. Neem Lucier, thank you for the stream. I hope that I said your name right. Glad to have you with us. And if you are a new viewer, by all means, as I always say, to all the new viewers, thank you for being here. Make sure if you like what we're doing, hit that subscribe button so that you can get those notifications whenever we have new content. And I look forward to seeing you on future streams as well. All right, next up, we got Rob Navarro. Rob, you say, welcome back again, Rob Navarro. Glad to have you back on the stream. You say, in a PPR league, I think I'm going to play Chris Carson and Cam Akers at running back and Hunt at flex. Have Ronald Jones on the bench. If Jones plays, do I start him over any of those other guys? That's a tough one. Let's put up the matchup information, see if that helps us make this decision here. Running back side. So Carson, we've talked about a little tonight. Seattle playing on the road at Washington. Tougher matchup in terms of the stats. Fourth fewest fantasy points to the running back spot. You would expect Chris Carson to get the volume. You also might expect Seattle to be playing with the lead, although some of their recent weeks have been a little bit more in question. Not this last one against the Jets because, they're the Jets. But nonetheless, Cam Akers had a big game. We talked about a little bit more. I will lean here on one of our other regulars, and that is Vansco. And Vansco, up a little bit higher in the chat, said this. He said, as a serious Rams fan who is starting Cam Akers in one of his leagues, I say he's liable to get his touchdown stolen. Goff, Henderson, Brown, or receiver McVay is tricky. I will agree with those sentiments that I know it's probably something you've been dealing with all year in terms of trying to start Cam Akers. You've been waiting for him to come on, and now he's had that big game, but that leaves you in a little bit of a dilemma. Do you ride with him, or are you still worried about some of the other guys there? Kareem Hunt has been a guy that I have liked all year, and I had him as a start for a bunch of weeks in a row in bad matchups. And then all of a sudden this last week came along, and I was like, well, you know what? He hasn't really been having great games, and this is a tough matchup. So I was a little down on Kareem Hunt this last week. And I think one of our guys here, I even might have been a question in the one of the previous streams. And so I wasn't as high on Hunt, and then lo and behold, he crushes them. And so, yeah, it's let me see what the matchup looks like here. Playing on the road at the New York Giants, allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the running back spot. A great matchup. Again, Hunt has been really good all year. He's had a couple of down games since Nick Chubb came back, but we just saw what he did against Baltimore. Like if you've been going with Hunt, if you want to get him back in your lineup, if you took him out and then he had that great game and you can get him back in there, I think he has potential. Again, with Ronald Jones, we'll talk about the matchup against Atlanta. Where are they? They're not as high as you would think to the running game. They're 27th to running backs, 6th fewest fantasy points in the league. It's weird because you just think Atlanta is, it doesn't seem like that tough of a team. But yeah, the matchup in terms of those stats is lower. But I just don't think he's going to play. That's just me personally. But I would be surprised. If you got a running back who's got a pin in his finger, the very week that he had that surgery, just like especially when you've got Fournette there, I just don't know why they play him this week. I will be surprised. So, and given that, if he does play, do I feel confident and comfortable given that situation? Not really. So I don't fault you with playing Carson over Akers because, again, we talk about the 4 factors that we always talk about in these matchups are ability, volume, matchup, and game script, and in that order for a reason, because you're typically going to trust the guy that you expect to get the volume over the matchup. And again, that Seattle game is not as great of a matchup. The Akers game is a better matchup. So if you're swinging for the fences and you need the guy that has the better chance for a huge game, then it might be Akers. But if you want the guy that you've trusted all year long and you feel is more predictable, more solid, then I don't disagree with that Carson start. Do you start Jones over any of those other guys? I don't think so. Not when the guy's had surgery this week. Again, does that mean he doesn't necessarily play well? No. But that's just kind of my gut. So yeah, I think you said, let's see, you're playing Carson and Akers at running back and Hunt at flex. Okay. So you're asking if Jones starts over any one of those guys. I don't think so. No, if it's different if he weren't going through this surgery, but I don't know what, you've got too much potential out of those other players to get you points. Carson's been great all year. I've liked Carson for a long time. I've been high on him. He's solid. Akers had that big game and has got a great matchup. And Kareem Hunt had that big game and has got a fairly, in the green, 9th, good matchup. So, yep, I don't see an issue with those picks at all. And again, once you watch those reports, I don't think Jones is going to play. That makes your decision super simple, and you're good to go. And Vansco, you follow up and saying Rob Navarro, I wouldn't start Jones over them. And yep, I think we're all kind of thinking the same thing there. So absolutely. Let me get back here over to these. Rob Navarro, glad to have you on the chat, and hope that whichever guys you go with there, I think you kind of know what you're looking at, but I hope they crush it and you are able to go on and have a nice run in your playoffs. Vansco, you said Todd has terrible knees. Oh yeah, I agree with that. The longer the season goes, his burst and health suffer, and that has to be what they're thinking about in Atlanta there. And then you also say McVay gives his running backs a lot of breathers. A lot of the times one guy will get you into the red zone, another guy comes in. Cam has got a majority of touches lately, though, which is promising. I will agree with that. I think to me, the most interesting thing here is what do you do with Cam Akers like next year in a draft? Like there are a couple of guys that this year have been really frustrating, but next year I think are really intriguing in terms of your fantasy draft. And one of those is Cam Akers, and the other one is J.K. Dobbins, because I think that the both of them have started to see glimpses of becoming the main guy for their team. And you've seen Mark Ingram start to disappear. I know Cam had the hot hand last game. You know, we're going to get more information over the run of these last few games as to what they think, if they're going to just keep leaning on him or if it does end up being more of a mix. But you never know what happens in the offseason. Do they keep all their backs? Do their backfields look different? Those guys are really interesting to me. I have a feeling that they're going to see a bump in the draft. Like you're going to have to probably draft them higher than you want to next year because I think a lot of people are going to be thinking that they have a good chance to kind of take – it was the same situation this year. A lot of people thought both of those guys, Akers and Dobbins, were going to take over their backfields. It just didn't necessarily happen. But, you had no preseason. You didn't have much of a camp. Potentially things would have been different this year if that wasn't the situation. But, yeah, I think that's very interesting moving forward as you look towards next year's fantasy draft. All right, we are cleaned up on the chats, which means we are moving into our content for the rest of tonight. Before we do that, let's put a quick promo up on the screen. Remind you guys about the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. That is our main show. We are on every Sunday live at 12 noon, streaming right here on our YouTube channel. We do the same thing as this show. We answer all your fantasy football questions, and we take you right up until game time, getting you ready for your matchups. We will also talk about the rest of our information. We are a brand new channel this year. So again, we thank you all for being with us. Definitely appreciate all of you that have helped us work towards a little bit over halfway now towards that goal of 100 new subscribers. We thank you all. We also are on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can send us your fantasy football questions to our Twitter account using the hashtag AskTFFLive during the week. And we will take those questions and answer them live on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook, the Fantasy Follow, website, fantasyfollow.com. All right, let's go through some of the content that we have here. I see a couple more chats. We will hit those up after we go through the content, and then we will probably call it a night. Been on for just over 2 hours tonight, so it's been another good night of chatting with you guys. Awesome to talk fantasy football, as always. Talking about waiver wire pickups right now, and just in time, because your waiver wire, you got up, if you're on Yahoo, like where I play, you got about an hour to get those in, 12 o'clock Pacific Coast time. West Coast time, I guess it's called, or good speaking English. I speak English good, I guess. At any rate, here are what we have for the top 5 waiver wire picks for Week 15, starting with Gus the Bus. Gus Edwards, running back for the Baltimore Ravens. He is currently rostered in 33% of all leagues. We've talked a little bit about that Baltimore backfield. It does look like Dobbins and Edwards have kind of risen as the 2. And certainly you feel a little bit more comfortable with 2 than you do with 3. Mark Ingram kind of a little bit of a disappearing act. Edwards, the last 2 weeks, he had this last week 49 yards on 7 attempts, 2 touchdowns. That was 18.3 fantasy points against Cleveland. He also had 101 yards rushing the game before that. If you are in need of a running back as you are going through your playoffs, or as I've been saying on our waiver wire video, you should be active at this time of the year in making moves, even if these are not guys that you are necessarily going to play. If you have a spot on your bench, if there's not a reason why you can't take them, like I know some leagues you're limited on how many moves you can make. If you're playing like in an unlimited league and you have guys that you don't need that you can cut, these are guys that you should, even if you're not playing them, potentially be picking up to make sure that your opponents are blocked from the potential big game that a guy like Gus Edwards could put up. The matchups for Gus Edwards in the next 2 weeks are very good. Jacksonville allowing the 5th most fantasy points to the running back spot, And then the New York Giants allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the running back spot. So there is some potential for Gus Edwards, whether you're playing him or whether you have to face him in a fantasy matchup. You want to avoid that situation. I've got Gus Edwards as the number 1 pickup on this week's waiver wire. And the number 2 spot, I've got John Brown from the Buffalo Bills, currently rostered in 41% of all leagues. Brown, one of the main receivers in what has been a high-scoring offense there for Buffalo, so that is what carries him to the number 2 spot this week. The matchups not necessarily great for the next 2 weeks. Denver and New England, that is the 8th and the 5th most fantasy points allowed to the wide receiver spot, respectively. However, like I said, one of your top receivers in a top-scoring team, he's returning from IR this week. He has seen in the last 2 games where he did play, he saw 19 targets over those 2 games. So again, this is a player that you pick up and potentially has some value for you, especially if you get a chance to get through 1 week and see what he does the next week. And again, you don't want to have to be facing somebody that you don't have to either. So that's why John Brown is number 2 on the waiver wire list. Number 3, it's Rashard Higgins from the Cleveland Browns. We saw a nice game from Higgins this last week, 68 yards, 6 catches on 10 targets, 1 touchdown. That was 18.8 fantasy points in the PPR scoring format against the Ravens. Higgins currently rostered in 13% of all leagues. He has seen 19 targets in the last 2 weeks and 2 touchdowns over that stretch. His upcoming matchups, the Giants, the 12th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot, and then the Jets, the 7th most to the wide receiver spot. Rashard Higgins, number 3 on the waiver wire, top 5 for week 15. In the number 4 spot, it's Russell Gage from the Atlanta Falcons, currently rostered in 11% of all leagues. Now, Russell Gage's value goes up based on the Julio Jones status. You want to keep an eye on that this week. If Jones is out, he certainly gets a little bit of a bump. This last game against, who was that against? The Chargers, it looks like is what my notes say there. Not even sure if that's right. 7 targets, 5 catches. You would think I do it just a couple days ago. You'd think I wouldn't be losing my mind yet, but we've been on the air for a couple hours. So anyway, 7 targets, 5 catches, 82 yards. Also adding a passing touchdown, 18.76 fantasy points for Gage. He has averaged 16.93 fantasy points over his last 2 games. Again, has seen some work there, and his work gets a bump without Julio Jones, so that does make a difference, and therefore I've got him at number 4 on this week's waiver wire. At number 5, from the Las Vegas Raiders, I have got Nelson Agholor, currently rostered in 36% of all leagues. Agholor, this last week, 9 targets, 5 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. That was 21.0 fantasy points against the Colts. 20 targets over the last 2 weeks for Nelson Agholor. There is some potential there. And his matchups, just a couple of middling matchups. The Chargers, that's Thursday night, 11th fewest fantasy points to a wide receiver spot. And then the Dolphins, 13th most. I've got Nelson Agholor as the number 5 on our top 5 waiver wire picks this week. All right, so to recap the top 5, waiver wire targets for week 15, Gus Edwards from the Baltimore Ravens, John Brown from the Buffalo Bills, Rashard Higgins from the Cleveland Browns, Russell Gage from the Atlanta Falcons, Nelson Agholor from the Las Vegas Raiders. A couple of bonus names this week to take a look at in addition to our top 5, and we talked about this guy a little bit. It's Derek Carr as a potential QB streamer this week for the Las Vegas Raiders, currently rostered in 47% of all leagues. This last week, 316 yards, 2 touchdowns, also added 12 yards on the ground and a touchdown there as well for a total of 25.84 fantasy points. He has averaged 29.29 fantasy points over the last 2 weeks. And in terms of the stats, a nice matchup this week playing the Chargers, allowing the 9th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Derek Carr, potential QB streamer, bonus name for you this week off the waiver wire. In addition, Philip Lindsay from the Denver Broncos. He is currently rostered in 44% of all leagues. The reason why Philip Lindsay shows up as a bonus here is that Melvin Gordon, looking a little bit banged up, player to keep an eye on for his status. Should Gordon not be able to go? For sure, Philip Lindsay is the guy in that backfield there. The matchup, a pretty good one, playing against my Buffalo Bills this week, who are giving up the 14th most fantasy points to the running back spot. So Philip Lindsay is a name to watch for this week on your waiver wire. In addition, another guy to take a look at, it's Jeff Wilson from the San Francisco 49ers. This has a lot to do with Raheem Mostert's status. if Mostert doesn't play this week. And again, he has undergone an MRI on his ankle injury, so not the best news there. Would be probably a bump for Wilson. But again, that backfield in San Francisco, sometimes hard to predict. 20% of all leagues is what Wilson is rostered in. And this last week, 31 yards and a touchdown for 9.4 fantasy points. And another name this week on our bonus names off the waiver wire, it is Irv Smith from the Minnesota Vikings. He returned this week from injury and put up 4 catches on 4 targets. That was 63 yards. Also had a touchdown for 16.3 fantasy points against the Bucs. Currently rostered in 7% of all leagues. And in terms of the stats, has a nice matchup this week against the Chicago Bears, currently allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the tight end spot. Irv Smith, another name on the bonus. So to recap the bonus names off the waiver wire this week, Derek Carr from the Raiders, Philip Lindsay from the Broncos, Jeff Wilson from the 49ers, and Irv Smith from the Vikings. And that is our look at our top waiver wire targets for week 15. I see a couple more chats here. We will go through these chats, and then we will probably call it a night for tonight. So let me see here where I left off. Vansco, you jumped in about the draft next year, and you said Cam will be the only Rams running back that I would draft next season. I can't disagree with that at all. And you think Sean wants him as the number 1. And I think certainly when you got a guy like that's a young player, certainly he's a future player and probably is your future in terms of being a Rams fan there. And then you said, I think he'll do great, although I'm a bit biased. I understand we've got the same similar situation here with my Bills between Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. Certainly our Bills run game has been a little bit suspect this year. But again, in terms of like your rooting interest and fantasy football are separate, and I always try to keep them that way. But certainly they do influence one another sometimes. And Rob Navarro, you say, thanks, guys. And I say, no, thank you, Rob Navarro, and thank you, Vansco. Let me see. Who else can I talk about here? Neam Lucier, Marco Rodriguez, A.B. Goldberger. I'm going through all these names here as I scroll up. David Z, Munir N., Eric Flores. If any of you guys are still on the stream, thanks for sticking with us. Chip Douglas, A. Aladdin, got a lot of great chats. Colton Cash, Trey S., Carlos Orozco. That might be Takashi 6400, some of our regulars. Chris Genova. Who else? Bobby Schmurda was on with us today. Who else at the top here? I'm looking as we scroll up. Zach Conroe, didn't mention him. Daniel Padilla. If I missed anybody, Ilias Giftopoulos. If I missed anybody, I apologize. But looking through the chats, I see all those names that have been with us tonight. We thank all of you guys for being on the stream. It's been another great night of talking fantasy football with you guys. Great week ahead. We thank you for being on with us for the TFF Live Tuesday night playoff special that we did this week. Let me see one more chat here. Let me grab that real quick. And Vansco, you say, have a good night, man. I'll see you Sunday. Absolutely, Vansco. Thanks for being with us. You have a good night as well. We thank you for being on the stream, as with all of you guys. Let's put up our information one more time. Talking about the TFF Live Sunday pregame show, our main show this Sunday at 12 noon. Come on and join us. We will be answering all your fantasy football questions as you get ready for your matchups. We'll have a couple of games in the books already this week when we get to our Sunday show, but nonetheless, still a lot of work to be done as you guys get through your fantasy football playoffs. And then once again, about us, we are the Fantasy Follow. We're a brand new channel this year on YouTube. We thank all of you and really appreciate everybody that's been with us, all of our regulars and our new viewers as well. If you have not done so, hit that subscribe button. Make sure that you get those notifications when we have new content. And again, we appreciate all of you that have helped us start getting towards reaching our goal of 100 new subscribers. On Twitter, you can find us at the Fantasy Follow. And that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can send us your questions to our Twitter account using the hashtag AskTFFLive. Send those to us during the week, and we will use them live on our Sunday pregame show. Facebook / The Fantasy Follow, and our website, thefantasyfollow.com. Been a great night of talking fantasy football with you guys. We hope all you guys got your waiver wire claims in there. Playoffs roll on. For those of you that have already had one round and are still alive, a great chance at your semifinals. So some of you that are just starting the playoffs this week, we hope all you guys, regardless of situation, we hope all you guys crush it. Want to see you move on towards those fantasy league championships. Again, thanks for being with us. Good luck in fantasy. We'll see you next time. Get those fantasy league championships.